Order, order. Ben Goldsborough to move the motion.
Thank you very much. I beg to move that this House has considered E-petition 750236 relating to Section 1 and 2 of firearm licences. It's a pleasure, as always, to serve under your chairmanship, Sir Alec. I refer honourable members to my register of interest. In preparation for today's debate, I spoke with experts on both sides of this debate. I want to thank everyone who took the time to speak with me, including the petitioner Lisa, the British Association of Shooting and Conservation, the Association of Professional Shooting Instructors, the Gun Control Network, and a Professor of Criminology. I also want to thank everyone who took the time to meet with me and thank the excellent staff of the Petitions Committee for their support. Colleagues will be unsurprised to hear that there were strong views expressed on both sides of this issue. But what impressed me most was the broad agreement I found about the need for legislative reform and the need to ensure safety. I know honourable members here today represent constituencies which have been touched by gun violence tragedies in recent years. I trust that everyone here will agree we must be on full listening mode when hearing from those colleagues. We all want the very best for our constituents. We all want to ensure that they are kept safe, and it's crucial that, even when members disagree, today's debate is kept respectful.
Will the Honourable Gentleman give way on that point?
Of course.
On that point, would the Honourable Gentleman agree it's vital that we consult fully the farming community? Shotguns are not just a sporting accessory to farmers, they're an essential aspect of their life to control vermin. So, will he ensure that this debate carries on? I mean, the last government wisely decided not to proceed with this. We've had separate legislation since 1920. This is really important for farmers, so the government should be very wary about proceeding with this.
I thank the right honourable member for his intervention there, and later on I will be addressing those very issues within my speech. We also need to be clear about what today's debate is about. We are discussing a specific policy point, a proposal to merge Section 1 and 2 of firearms licensing. In other words, to align licensing controls on shotguns with those that already apply to rifles. In introducing this debate, I will do my utmost to explore how we can protect the shooting industry and rural economy, to tidy up and update the legislative framework, and to ensure the safety of all our constituents. Because at the heart of this debate is about balance. It's about recognising the legitimacy of lawful shooting and the economic and cultural contribution it makes.
On that point,
Yes.
I'm grateful he's making an excellent speech. I just want to pay a brief tribute to a stalwart of the British Association of Shooting and Conservation, Christopher Graffius, who died in his sleep last week. There were many issues on which we had different views, but he was extremely kind and helpful to me when I was a Shadow Minister. He had a huge depth of knowledge and passion for the countryside, and he would have been following this debate closely. He was a true gentleman, and I hope my honourable friend will agree with me that we all miss his kindness, integrity and fellowship.
Excellently put by my honourable friend, and all of us that have had the pleasure of spending time with Christopher want to send our heartfelt condolences to him and his family, because he was, as you rightly say, a gent. So we need to make sure that we respond to the risk to protect the vulnerable and to ensure our laws reflect the reality of the world we live in today, not the world that it was 60 years ago. So let me begin by setting out clearly where we are. There are around 500,000 gun owners in the United Kingdom, roughly 1% of the population, and of those, around 90% use their firearms for leisure, for sport, or for legitimate countryside management. The overwhelming majority of those owners are responsible. The National Crime Agency has said that firearms certificate holders are highly unlikely to be involved in serious and organised crime. That is an important fact. It deserves to be stated clearly in this House. The shooting sector is also economically significant. It contributes £3.3 billion a year in gross value added to the UK economy. It generates £9.3 billion in wider economic activity and supports an estimated 67,000 full-time equivalent jobs. And those jobs are not just abstract, they're jobs in rural pubs, hotels, jobs in small family-run retailers, jobs in manufacturing, in tourism, in land management, in pest control. They are jobs that sustain rural communities and working people across our country. In constituencies like mine in South Norfolk, and in many represented across this House, the leisure sector is not a lifestyle choice. It is the backbone of the local economy. And we must always be mindful that decisions taken in Westminster have real-world consequences in those communities. At the same time, our legislative framework is undeniably outdated. Much of this dates back to the 1960s, and while amendments made since then, particularly after tragedies such as Dunblane, which have strengthened safety, the overall framework has evolved in a piecemeal way. These reforms include the ban on handguns, were necessary and proportionate responses to unimaginable horror. They reflected the will of the public and the duty of Parliament to act in the interest of safety. And I do not believe anyone serious about public safety would suggest reversing these protections. But it is equally true that legislation cannot stand still because the world does not. As a law...
I think he is making some very important points, but does he note that the Law Commission, in its report in 2015, report on firearms, did not recommend moving Section 2 to Section 1, and even though he references the points made to do with previous instances, despite that, in 2015, the Law Commission was very clear in its recommendations to the government at the time.
Thank the honourable member for his intervention. Later on in my speech, I'll be addressing some of the reforms that I think are needed within firearms. There's pressures on 3D printed firearms, amendments, adaptions, those sort of issues I think are more important as a pressing matter that we need to address, but I'll go on to that later on. As the law currently exists, there is a clear distinction between Section 1 and Section 2. Under Section 2, an individual may obtain a shotgun certificate and, once granted, may own multiple shotguns without specifying each individual firearm in advance. Under Section 1, the process is more restrictive. Applicants must demonstrate a good reason for each firearm. Each weapon must be individually authorised, and use is generally restricted to specific land and subject to police oversight. That distinction reflects differences in use, in tradition, and in lethality. Fortunately, gun violence in the United Kingdom remains rare by international standards. In the year ending September 25, there were 4,851 recorded firearms offences in England and Wales, a 9% decrease on the previous year. That is welcome progress, but behind those numbers are still lives lost, families grieving, and communities changed forever. I'm just going to continue a little bit. In the year end March 25, 32 people were killed by shooting. And when we look more closely, we see deeply troubling patterns. More than 60% of women killed with guns were shot using a licensed firearm. That statistic should give every one of us a pause in this chamber. But it reminds us that the greatest risks often arise not from organised crime, but from breakdowns in systems that are supposed to protect people. Domestic abuse featured prominently in many of the conversations I had for this debate. Firearms in the home can be used not only as weapons, but as tools of coercion and control. Their presence can deepen fear, it can make escape feel impossible, and it can turn moments of crisis into irreversible tragedy. We must also recognise the wider context. Mental health challenges are particularly acute in rural communities. Isolation, financial pressure, and barriers to accessing services all play a role. And access to a lethal means during moments of acute distress can turn temporary despair into permanent loss. Yes.
I'm very grateful to the member giving way, and I should alert you, Mr. Alex, that I am the chairman of the British Shooting Sports Council. But on that point about mental health issues, would you agree that medical markers on doctors' records would be a perfect solution to that particular problem, rather than necessarily doing what we're proposing today?
I thank the honourable gentleman, and I think he's read a bit of my speech going forward. At a time of technological change, it is introducing new risks. Converting blank firing weapons, imitation firearms, and emerging technologies such as 3D printing are changing the landscape of firearms crime. These developments do not respect boundaries of legislation written decades ago. So we face a dual responsibility. We must protect public safety, and we must do so in a way that is fair, proportionate, and grounded in evidence. The petition before us today, signed by more than 121,000 people, reflects genuine concern. Many petitioners fear that merging Section 1 and Section 2 licensing would increase bureaucracy, create delays, and impose additional costs without delivering meaningful safety benefits. Those concerns are not just abstract, they reflect real frustrations with an already stretched licensing system. Many applicants experience long waits. Many police forces face capacity challenge. I'm just going to make way. I'm just going to continue. So I'd ask the Minister to ensure that any proposed changes are accompanied by robust economic modelling, including the potential impact on rural businesses, on employment and on participation. I give way to me.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way, Sir Alex, and as chair of the committee, I can say he's doing a damn good job, and I thank him. The Father has referred to farmers needing shotguns to control vermin, and the crofters in my constituency have a huge trouble with hoodie crows who come to peck the eyes out of lambs, and no wonder they need their guns. I wish the Scottish National Party was here today, because policing in the north of Scotland is a shadow of what it was, and this will put an additional strain on those cops. They haven't got the time to do all this.
I thank the honourable member for that intervention there. I'm just going to make this. I'm just going to make it some. So, if changes is because we must never fall into the trap of believing that good intentions alone are sufficient. Policy must be judged on outcomes. We must also recognise the distinct nature of different firearms. Shotguns and rifles serve different purposes. They have different characteristics. They're used in different contexts. Farmers and pest controllers rely on shotguns as tools of their trade. Any reform must recognise that reality and ensure that legitimate working use is protected. At the same time, there are clear and practical steps we can take to strengthen safety without imposing unnecessary burdens. We can ensure the licensing decisions are informed by the fullest possible information, including appropriate engagement with medical professionals. We can strengthen safeguards in cases involving domestic abuse. We can modernise licensing systems, embracing digital technology to reduce delays, improve consistency, and free up police time. We can... I'm just going to keep making progress. We can ensure that legislation keeps pace with technological change, closing loopholes before they can be exploited. And we can ensure that our approach is coherent, joined up, and fit for the 21st century. Because ultimately, this is not about choosing between safety and the rural economy. It's between recognising that both matter, that both deserve our attention, and that good legislation must deliver both. In my constituency and constituencies across the country, people expect us to get this right. They expect us to listen carefully, they expect us to act responsibly, and they expect us to put safety first whilst also respecting lawful activity and rural livelihoods. This debate is not about ideology, it's about responsibility. Responsibility to victims, responsibility to rural communities, responsibility to the many thousands of people who participate in shooting safely and lawfully. So let's approach this issue in that spirit, not seeking easy answers, but seeking the right ones. Not driven by fear, but guided by evidence. And not choosing between safety and prosperity, but delivering both. Because when we get legislation right, when we listen, when we act thoughtfully and carefully, we strengthen not only public safety, but public trust. And that is our most important duty of all.
Order. May I just ask members to remain standing for a moment who want to speak, and members probably know that it is helpful to put their name in beforehand because they will be on the list to speak and they will be called before anybody else. This is a long debate. It does go on till 7:30 p.m. Members are expected to be back in for wind-ups, and as it is such a long debate, those wind-ups may come before members are expecting. Some members have approached me and offered apologies, which I have accepted for prior commitments, but I do expect everybody else to follow the protocols. So the question is that this House has considered E-petition 750236 relating to section 1 and 2 firearms licensing. John Lamont.
Thank you, Sir. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. And I would like to start by thanking the Honourable Member for South Norfolk for bringing forward this debate on behalf of the Petitions Committee in the way and the manner in which he did so in a very measured speech, I felt. I also start by recognising some of the deeply emotive and tragic cases that have been raised as part of this wider debate, and perhaps has been the motivation for some of the changes that are being proposed by the government. These are incidents that shock us all, and I know that the thoughts of everyone in the House will be those affected. It will be with those affected by gun crime. And I would like to thank the more than 400 people in the Scottish Borders who have signed this petition, along with the 120,000 people across the United Kingdom. I would also like to thank the many constituents who have contacted me to express their concerns over these proposals, including Paul Allison and Rob Pyle, both from Hoyt, Jeremy Beattie from Lillesleaf, Mary McCallan from Lauder, alongside many, many others. The Government's proposal to merge sections 1 and 2 of the firearms licensing has caused deep concern in our rural communities. Shooting is worth £3.3 billion to the UK economy and generates 67,000 full-time jobs, many of which are in my constituency in the Scottish Borders. This proposal would represent one of the most significant shifts affecting countryside industries in decades, and most importantly, it would not make people feel safer. The United Kingdom already has one of the most effective and strictest systems of firearms licensing in the world. Between April 2024 and March 2025, only 4 homicide cases involved a licensed firearm, a similar number to the previous year. Sadly, in many of the cases raised, I'm sure, by honourable members today, this proposal would not have prevented these tragedies. However, this change would have a significant impact on those who require a shotgun for their job: farmers, land managers, and pest controllers. It could even affect clay pigeon shooting, an activity enjoyed by many who do not even consider themselves to be shooters or part of rural industries. It would also have a negative impact on gun shops, businesses whose expertise ensures that firearms are sold only to those legally permitted to possess them. Furthermore, plans to merge sections 1 and 2 of firearms licensing would place an even greater burden on our already overstretched police forces. Yes.
Thank you, the honourable member, for giving way. Rural police forces already handle the highest concentration of firearms licensing work in the country. And does the honourable member agree that merging section 1 and 2 could increase or will increase administrative burdens and lengthen waiting times for law-abiding applicants? And is there not also a risk that diverting more police time into additional paperwork could reduce focus on illegal firearms and serious organised crime, which pose the greatest threat to public safety?
I think the honourable lady makes an important point, which nicely leads into the next point I was going to make, and that poorly resourced police forces could be overwhelmed and might even refuse to accept new applications. And this happened in Gloucestershire in 2024. This would have a significant impact on people who rely on firearms for their jobs and livelihoods. I'm afraid, Sir Alec, this is an example of government not really understanding how rural communities work. If government,
that point, would you give way?
Yes.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. Does he agree with me that the Highbridge, Huntsville and Burnham District Wildfowling Club in my constituency, they have raised concerns that aligning these licences will put an undue burden on both shotgun owners and suppliers and put increased pressure on our rural communities?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. I don't know the club in question, but they make the same point that many of my constituents have made and others have raised as part of the debate on this proposal. Now, if the government wishes to improve public safety, I would encourage them to accept the proposals, which have been backed by organisations such as BASC, for mandatory medical markers. This would ensure that medical concerns are identified as they arise, rather than waiting for licence renewal. Now, this proposal, I believe, has cross-party support and industry support, yet the government has thus far rejected it. However, well-intentioned, these proposals would not improve public safety. It would simply harm our rural communities and the hundreds of thousands of people who use shotguns lawfully. Firearms, yes.
I'm very grateful to the honourable member. He's making some important points, and we do have to have an eye, as the honourable gentleman who proposed the motion, to the overall lethality of the population of firearms. And I just wondered if I could ask him to reflect on whether we're in a careful what you wish for situation. I am a shotgun certificate holder, owner of a shotgun. If I'm forced to go through the procedure to get effectively a firearms licence, I'm much more likely to acquire a firearm. And so while we might see a fall in the number of shotguns out there, we may well see a rise in the number of rifles out there, and therefore the overall lethality of the population of firearms may actually rise.
My right honourable friend makes an excellent point. It's really important the government and the civil servants supporting the government consider these wider impacts as a consequence of these changes, if indeed they are progressed. Now, firearms legislation has been crucial in keeping people safe, and there are practical, workable measures the government could take to improve it. But this is not one of them. It will make it harder for those who work in our rural communities to do their jobs. The government must listen to the evidence, listen to those who have responded to the consultation and to the members across the chamber today. I would urge them to abandon these plans because they will not work and they will severely impact jobs and our economy and the rural way of life. Thank you.
Portrait Crichton.
Thank you, Sir Alex. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I thank my honourable friend for the balanced way in which he has introduced this debate. And I should say at the outset that my constituents completely understand the need to consult on regulations. The fatal shooting in the neighbouring Isle of Skye some 2.5 years ago involving a shotgun cast a shadow over all Highland communities, and our sympathies and concerns go out to everyone who was affected by that incident. Notwithstanding that, you will understand that I don't come to this debate in support of shooting, but from a conservation concern. And being a Labour MP and one who believes in radical land reform, I hold no candle for the shooting and fishing brigade any more than I do for these urban rewilders who would want from the power of their laptops to reintroduce rapacious species to hunt our flocks of sheep in the countryside. My concern is with conserving the human population and the agricultural and crofting economy which sustains the livelihoods of my constituents in the Hill and Year. In New Zealand, they often complain that sheep outnumber human beings 4 to 1. In my archipelago, greylag geese outnumber our sheep 10 to 1. And these marauding flocks of greylag geese, thousands of them, literally thousands of them, the largest breed of geese in the British Isles, now find their permanent home feeding on the macher grass and the crofts of the Western Isles, which my crofting constituents crop and use to feed livestock. And according to the Scottish Crofters Federation, and I declare my membership and support for that organisation, we have gone beyond the tipping point where these birds are causing significant damage to crops and grass. And the problem is particularly acute in Ewart and Benbecula, where geese can be seen at any time of day or night and in any season feeding on the precious grassland. And the damage the geese are causing to the crofting system, and dare I say to the distilling process, because the North Ewart distillery, which produces Downpour gin, relies on the locally grown grain, is now dangerous. The Ewart short oats, and the strain is over 1,000 years old, is dying out and is in such short supply that the seed is now not available for crops all year round. As one of my correspondents put it, we're unable to buy this seed because it's in such short supply because the flipping geese have eaten it all. Now, what does this all have to do with shotgun licensing? There is a cull of geese, fully supported by Nature Scotland, the national nature agency, but the cull, and by implication the oats, and by implication the economics of crofting in Ewart, depend on having local marksmen to shoot the geese. And I met with the Ewart Goose Group a few days ago to hear their concerns. They are, like the vast majority of people who hold gun licences, the most law-abiding people you would care to meet. They take their responsibilities in terms of firearm licensing and in terms of their culling work very, very seriously. And they are seriously good marksmen as well, Mr. Chairman. One of their members represents the Western Isles at clay pigeon shooting, which would also be affected by this change in regulation, and competes at national level. And the shooters have been reporting difficulties in getting gun licence of late, and this has occasionally led to individual marksmen not being available to take part in the cull when required. Now, these islanders are not against firearms regulations, far from it. They see the logic in consolidating licences, but they see practical difficulties too. The reclassification of shotguns would increase their own administration for getting properly certified, and the rising cost of licences is acting as a disincentive to new entrants to this scheme. And there's concern that the shooting and culling skills will not be passed on if there are not new entrants who come through either clay pigeon or by holding and handling shotguns. And their own worry is that their skill, which must be, of course, maintained and repeated in order to be kept at a high level, will be lost as well. And the administrative concerns and the practical difficulties for island and rural geographies would also involve the storage of weapons and ammunition, shotgun cartridges being obviously much larger in volume than the .223 gauge bullets that are commonly used in shooting. And there's also the issue of transferring shotguns between licence holders and dealers, borrowing and lending under current regulations is common enough practice, where there are a limited number of guns and a limited number of shooters, and not all are available at the same time. And the burden of administration would not only fall on the licence holder, but also on the police firearms licensing unit, and my constituents speak very highly of the Highland firearms officers and their expertise, but also have an effect on the limited number of licensed dealers, firearms dealers in the Western Isles and the West Coast. There is, of course, a tourism impact and the concern that shooting parties would be lessened under the new legislation, but as I said at the beginning, I hold no candle for the sporting lobby or shooting any more than I do for radical conservationists. My concerns, which I hope the Minister and the Government take into account when considering any changes, is with the protection of crofting and croft land from the menace of grey-lag geese and perhaps the unforeseen consequences of a change in regulation. Our manifesto in 2024 promised to promote biodiversity and protect landscapes and wildlife. And when it comes to crofting agricultural practice in the Hebrides, especially in the Macher, we need to cull the geese, not to maintain the diversity of the ecosystem, but also to maintain the rural population and to protect us all. Thank you.
Yeah. Dave Dugan.
Thank you, Sir Alan. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. First of all, I'd like to correct the record. As you can clearly see, Sir Alec, the SNP are very much in this debate, contrary to the claims of the Honourable Member for Caithness, Sutherland and Easter Ross. I will indeed give way.
I think it is only fair, Sir Alex, to offer an abject apology to the Honourable Member, and a large refreshment will be his later today.
It's only fair that I accept both of those acknowledgements, Sir Alec. And we are here because of the 121,000 signatures on that petition. Many of the highest constituency counts of those signatures are in Scotland, where gun ownership per capita is much higher than it is elsewhere in these islands for entirely predictable and understandable reasons. And in my constituency of Angus and Perthshire Glens, the highest respondent rate of all of the United Kingdom, of 550 respondents against this proposal by government, have come from my constituency, and with good reason, because whether you're up Glen Prosen, Glen Isla, Glen Clova, Glen Esk or Glen Lethnot, or in Strathtae, Strathtummel or Strathmore, your possession and operation and use and discharge of your shotgun is just a part of everyday life. It is an essential tool, is what it is, Sir Alec, for maintenance of a rural way of living. And as other honourable and right honourable members have attested, there is a growing concern that perhaps this government isn't fully or nearly conversant enough, as they should be, with that which goes on in across our rural communities. I think in terms of the public safety evidence, I don't think anybody in this room is minded or motivated to get in the way of something that would improve firearms or shotgun control to protect the public. I don't think anybody would object to that. But I think what people in here are objecting to, and many people out there are objecting to, is a vast increase in the bureaucratic burden, which will deliver no significant increase in public safety. And as other members have pointed out, we should, during this debate, remember those who have suffered at the hands of delinquent use of shotguns and firearms. But that is important and it's vital, but so too is making sure that any measures to modify the regulation around about it is effective in increasing public safety. And where it is seen to not be effective, and I think it's fairly clearly demonstrated that this will not be effective, then we should be very sceptical indeed. I don't want to recover the points that people have made in the difference between effect and lethality between firearms and shotguns, because that's well documented. And there's a reason, dating back, as others have said, to 1920, why they have been categorised differently because of that substantial difference in lethality. And that hasn't changed since it's now 2026. It is the same difference in lethality. And I think if we look to tragedies such as that which happened in Plymouth, we can see that the problem there that facilitated that tragedy was not one of regulatory impropriety. It was one of application of the regulation. And if the regulation had been applied effectively in that instance, then there's a very good probability that that tragedy would never have happened. Around about 25% of firearms applications already take over a year to process, and 30 out of 43 police forces in England and Wales have missed the 4-month processing target already. Licensing fees have risen by 133%, and applying Section 1 checks to all shotgun risks overwhelming an already underperforming system with the clearly demonstrable challenges that will present to our rural communities. In Scotland, Police Scotland operate a single national licensing unit, and that consistently outperforms forces in England and Wales. And I say that not as any sort of cheap political point. I say that because quite clearly, if you centralise and standardise and properly resource the licensing regime, then you will see substantial improvements in turnaround times. And what we need to see, as well as that, is far more robust public protections. But don't let me forget to mention that many of my constituents and others in Scotland, despite the work that Police Scotland's licensing unit does, still have to run the gauntlet with the general practice regime, which is by no means straightforward in Scotland. And that's certainly something that should be looked at. Strengthening firearms licensing units throughout the United Kingdom would be a positive thing. Standardisation of it would be a positive thing. Electronic record keeping would be a positive thing. Closing the gaps in private shotgun sales by requiring sellers to verify buyer certificates directly with issuing police via a secure online portal. All reasonable and practical changes that can be presumed to have a positive effect on the regime, which is in contrast to that which the government is proposing with their proposed merger of the two sections. And I hope after today's debate, which is very well attended, and I think people are speaking passionately about the strength of feeling that they've got from their constituents, all up and down these islands, mines included, is that there is enough burden on ordinary people in rural communities trying to maintain the countryside in the way that we all expect it to do, trying to make their farm business work properly, trying to deal with the effects of challenges from the family farm tax to the ENIX problems, to the business property relief, to the tax on crew cab pickups. Many people across rural Britain are thinking, what next from central government? I give way.
I have a farmer in my constituency who runs a shoot in Hedgeley, and he has told me now repeatedly that if this legislation goes through, he will lose his business. It's a family-run farm business. It's going to put him out of business and many other farmers who run shoots that have kept them viable. So would my friend agree with me that this is just not the way forward?
I completely agree with the Honourable Lady that the government has to look again at this, has to listen very carefully. And I know so there's a very serious minister that's come to speak to this today, so I'm hopeful that we'll get some very clear remarks from government about how they intend to properly interrogate the consultation, to divine from the responses within that consultation precisely the serious nature that licence holders take this issue, and that they're not looking for an easy life. If they were looking for an easy life, they wouldn't be in the employment that they're in just now. They're not looking for any shortcuts or anything like that. They look forward to a robust regime, but one that respects and understands the rural way of life. Thank you.
Julie Minns.
It is a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and can I thank my honourable friend, the member for South Norfolk, for introducing this debate. I should also like to put on my thanks to the 323 residents of my Carlisle constituency who signed this petition, and the many more constituents who contacted me directly about this matter. Now, it goes without saying that our first duty as legislators should be to safeguard the public. But in doing so, we also have a responsibility to ensure that any change we make is evidence-based, proportionate, and operationally sound. Any loss of life is a tragedy, and it's important that lessons are learned, but most importantly, in responding to tragedy, we must be mindful to be led by the evidence. I note in their response to the petition, the government states that, and I quote, that legally held shotguns have been used in a number of homicides and in other incidents in recent years, including the fatal shootings in Plymouth in 2021. They go on to say that recommendations relating to strengthening shotgun controls have been made to the government by the coroner in his Preventing Future Deaths report issued in May 2023. Now, I would like to place on record my deep felt sympathy for the family and friends of all of the victims of that incident and all of those of other shootings. I have, however, taken time to read the coroner's report and note that the coroner made several recommendations, including nationally accredited training for firearms licensing staff, proper assessment of medical information, ensuring decisions are made at the correct seniority level, improved oversight, governance and audit systems, clearer guidance and consistent application of national policies, and better communication and information sharing. All recommendations, I would believe, are supported right across the House. However, the coroner was silent on the merging of the two licensing regimes. Now, that's not to say there may not be advantages in doing so, but rather we need to be clear that the coroner's report in that case did not necessarily recommend it. Across the shooting sector, key organisations, as we've already heard, including the Clay Pigeon Shooting Association, the British Association for Shooting and Conservation, as well as the National Farmers Union, have raised significant concerns about potential changes. They argue that merging the two licensing systems is unnecessary and disproportionate, that current evidence does not support the claim that such a merger would enhance public safety, and with those concerns in mind, I believe it's also important to note that crime involving legally held firearms remains at historically low levels. At the same time, evidence suggests the licensing departments in our local police forces have been overstretched and inconsistent in applying guidance as it stands. Adding hundreds of thousands of additional shotgun holders into a system designed for far fewer Section 1 applicants does, I believe, risk creating unmanageable delays and increasing the administrative burden and the substantial cost to both certificate holders and the police. This has consequences far beyond the shooting sports community. Rural economies, pest control, game management, conservation and the businesses that rely on seasonal shooting activity could all be placed under pressure.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady. She's making a very strong point about evidence-based policy making. She'll be aware the inevitable truism of what we do in this place, and that is that we need to draw lines in terms of legislation between freedoms and responsibilities, between rights and public protection in this case. I mean, she acknowledges the fact that the government should certainly keep this matter under review, and has come forward with a set of proposals, and like many other speakers seems to be opposed to this particular proposal. But does she agree that the government should have the opportunity to at least review these policies? And but is she effectively saying that the government needs to go back to the drawing board and look at this matter again?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. I think it's absolutely incumbent upon any government to carefully consider any issue, and in this regard I would certainly be urging the Minister to approach the consultation with an open mind and not having a predetermined outcome for the conclusion. For many, this proposal represents a far-reaching regulatory shift with consequences that may not have yet been fully understood. The anxiety that's been expressed to myself and other members is not rooted in resistance to safety. My constituents want safe gun use. They want dangerous individuals to be prevented from accessing firearms. What they question is whether creating a larger, potentially more congested system will achieve these outcomes, or whether it risks the opposite by overwhelming the very departments responsible for ensuring public safety and taking away what are incredibly useful and effective pest control tools from farmers, landowners and pest control agents. There are other more targeted and effective steps that might be taken. Properly resourcing our police licensing teams, ensuring consistent national standards and rigorous application of the Home Office's statutory guidance should be the priority, so that those who should never have access to a shotgun do not get one under any licence, and those who use them responsibly in their work and on their land are not penalised for doing so. I therefore urge ministers to ensure that any reform focuses on what will genuinely improve safety. Properly resource licensing teams, consistent national standards, and measures that address illegal firearms rather than imposing burdens on those who use shotguns responsibly for work, sport and conservation. So Alec, evidence, not symbolism, must guide our decisions. I encourage members across the House to examine this proposal closely during the consultation to ensure that public safety is strengthened without causing disproportionate harm to rural communities.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sir Alec, and it's a pleasure to speak under your chairmanship. I think I first want to put on record that I do enjoy shooting, and I've also been shot, so one who's seen both sides of this equation. I also want to thank the South Shropshire residents that over 738 had signed this petition as of last week. And as the Honourable Member from Angus and Perthshire, Glens, has mentioned, a lot of the remote regions, or mainly up in Scotland, firearm licences are in large proportion. In South Shropshire, I think we're in the top 2 or 3 within the country of licence holders. So this is very important to my constituents, and it really has an impact, not just into people that use this as a pastime, but for farmers and people that use it for pest control, gamekeepers. It also brings a lot of money into the rural communities and the rural economy, particularly in the winter months, when a lot of the tourist areas, of which South Shropshire is obviously the best, a lot of those areas are impacted, and this helps bring extra trade in. One of the numbers I picked up when doing the research into this, at the end of the 31st of March 2025, there is around 170,000 Section 1 firearm licences, and the Honourable Member from South Norfolk, who's done very well in bringing this debate forward, mentioned there was over 500,000 Section 2 shotgun licence holders. And I'll come on to that later in the debate. That's going to cause a significant issue if the firearms licences were to be merged and put together Section 1 and Section 2 within that. A lot of the differences have been mentioned, but it's not just based on the recognition of lethality, but we're also looking around the constraints of user profile, how they're going to use them, which circumstances they're used, which starts to get very complex between the 2 different licences, between Section 1 and Section 2. And for good reason, you must prove for good reason for each Section 1, and that's each Section 1 firearm licence they wish to possess. Where Section 2, the licence holder only needs a good reason for having a shotgun. And there's also restrictions around buying and selling, storing of ammunition, which starts getting very complex for what would be a shotgun will do compared to a firearms. I do understand the reasons for changes, and when we look, or the reasons that changes have been brought forward, but when we look at the 2 tragic incidents in 2021 and 24, and my thoughts go out to everybody that was killed during that tragic time. In 2021, Jake Davidson murdered 5 people with a lethally held shotgun, but local police had warned about his unsuitability to carry a shotgun. The merging of Section 1 and Section 2 there would not have made any difference to that tragic incident. In 2024, we saw with Nicholas Prosper he actually committed a criminal offence by forging a Section 2 certificate to acquire a shotgun and used it to murder 3 family members. Same again, Section 1 and Section 2 would have not have made an impact in my mind of both of those tragic incidents, as horrible as they are. But let's look at the impacts that this is going to have on not just my residents, but many across the whole of the country. And I'm urging the government to seriously think about these proposals. This is a very reasoned debate where all sides are putting across measured responses. We all want to see that we have the appropriate measures in place to protect citizens, and we have some of the most robust measures currently in place to deal with licensing at the moment. And if you look at, if you're having a firearms, a shotgun license, it's quite easy to casually over 5 years go and shoot a few times with clay pigeons, do a few game shoots, have a farmer to occasionally let you deal with some of the pest control. It gets very hard if you're then having to go through the same restrictions that you would with a Section 1, where you need specific land to maybe cull deer or things like that. There is a limit of how many people a farmer is going to allow on the land to do that, and it starts restricting the abilities to be able to do that. And BASC have done, I must also declare I'm a member of BASC, but they have done some extensive research that looks upward of between 1 and 3 billion of the GVA, which shooting currently contributes, is at risk of being lost overnight, as well as 20,000 jobs within that. And there's a huge amount of conservation that goes unnoticed within this. And we're looking at probably around about 500 million per annum of the 2024 value of shooting report goes into conservation. That would be lost. There would be a reduction in shooting. It would lead to fewer cover crops, less predator control. The list goes on and on. There is a huge impact that this would have to conservation as well. And look at our farmers. Let's turn to the great work that the farmers do. And we've heard through different people here the impact this would have on farmers. I grew up on a farm, and pest control was, I grew up working on a farm, didn't live on the farm. Pest control was part of an everyday life for farmers of what they had to do. And honourable members pointed out there about the crows and different things like that. If you have to go through a Section 1 firearms licence for pest control on a farm, it is not going to happen. There is going to be a huge impact that's going to have on there. The administrative burden on farmers with everything else that they've got to go through this as well is going to have a massive impact. And it does feel, I've spoken to many of my local farmers, this is another attack on their rural way of life. Yeah. I will, yes.
My honourable friend is making a strong point about the administrative burden, but would you agree with me that probably the most burdensome element would be the restrictions placed on ammunition? And in particular, individual licence holders would obviously have a limit on the amount of ammunition they could own at any one time. The recording of, I think there's something like 250 million cartridges sold every year in the UK that would all have to be recorded, auditable, there'd have to be an audit trail, and probably an inspection regime to make sure people weren't buying more or acquiring more than over their limit. And that this is going to involve enormous numbers of people in the administration of it, and in the end going to result probably in the acquisition of a huge computer system at vast cost, just to track something that is not at the moment identified as a problem.
My honourable friend makes a really valid point, and that's often going to be overlooked at this when people are looking at the difference between Section 1 and Section 2. People will bulk order shotgun cartridges. They'll be able to pick them up when they need to for a shoot legally with a licence. You can't buy them without that licence. But as I raised at the beginning of the debate, there's about 170,000 Section 1 licences, 500,000 of shotgun Section 2 licences. This administrative burden for the police, I think, will be off the scale. It's going to be hard to even see how they can do that. And that moves nicely on to my next point about the impact within the police there. But the National Crime Agency has stated that legally held firearms, as we have heard, are rarely used in criminal activity. And on top of this, what I mentioned at the beginning, how on earth is any, or most police authorities going to be able to deal with 500,000 Section 1, if they are merged, additional licences going into the same level of Section 1? That is a significant burden, and particularly around, as my honourable friend just mentioned there, on the ammunition, which will be often overlooked when people will buy
pallet loads because they are having shoots organised or planned. That's quite a regular thing for people that are shooting week in, week out. And there's a significant burden that I don't believe any police force will be able to deal with under the current constraints that they have. And I speak regularly with my police authority, particularly West Mercia Police do a great job within this, but there are pressures around them on the current system already. I just want to highlight, I know this has been a reasoned debate, but I'd only be fair to put what a few of my constituents have said. Anthony, who regularly shoots, said this is yet another culture war inspired on attack at rural communities. And Tom, who also from my constituency, said the latest proposals seem more designed to punish than legislate. So we're seeing the impact. This is how it's landing out there, and I know that is not the intention. And I know that the government are listening, and we're trying to put across the most reasoned debate within that. There is an alternative solution that the Countryside Alliance have put forward as one suggestion. So the honourable member from South Norfolk had mentioned that people are aware that legislation might need to change, or how this is processed and dealt with. And they put forward a good idea of a single centralised firearms licensing body, such as the DBS or the DVLA, that allows the police to carry out their normal roles rather than becoming a licensing body, which they're not set up to do, a centralised digital system that can work with local police authorities around this. And I'm sure they will have much more information if the Minister requires that. But to conclude, to finish off there, Sir Alex, a merger of Section 1 and Section 2, although would set out with good intentions, will have far overreaching consequences that have probably not been thought through in great detail. But what it will result is a loss to the economy, the rural economy, a far fewer number of people with licences, and an administrative burden on the police that will be unsustainable. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Alex. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I approached you beforehand to outline. Unfortunately, I won't be able to be here at the end of the debate, so I apologise to the Minister because of Select Committee business, and that really is a genuine shame, because I think this has been one of the most productive, thoughtful Westminster Hall debates, petition debates that I've had the pleasure to be involved in so far in my short time as Member of Parliament. I'd like to thank my honourable friend for South Norfolk, the way that he opened this debate in very thoughtful terms, covering a wide range of the issues that we do want to put before the government. Sir Alec, I do recognise that this debate is coming in the context of some terrible tragedies in Plymouth, as we heard several years ago, in Skye and elsewhere. And I want to make clear that I'm not opposed to tight gun controls whatsoever. In fact, I'm very in favour of it, and I think it's one of the great strengths of our country as we compare ourselves to other developed nations in the world about how we approach gun control. It's a great strength. And our thoughts are absolutely with those affected by some of those tragedies. What I would be grateful to the government for, however, is an exemption, at least for farmers, and possibly others, to the merging of Section 1 and Section 2 licences if it does go ahead. 483 of my own constituents signed this petition. In my constituency of North Northumberland, there are at least 800 farms, probably well over 1,000 people working in or around agriculture. And a number of them have contacted me about the consultation and the floated changes to firearms licensing. I'd certainly give way.
Just as a member of BASC and a member of the Countryside Alliance Ireland as well, and I do have the opportunity to shoot on certain occasions. But there's little evidence. Does he agree there's little evidence to show that moving Section 2 to Section 1 will improve public safety? Indeed, it's a contrary. For land managers, for pest controllers, for farmers, for gamekeepers, a shotgun and a rifle are the tools of the jobs that they do. And if government pursues this policy in any way whatsoever, it will reduce the proven economic, employment, environmental and the social benefits that currently are available for us.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his intervention, and as my Honourable friend from Carlisle said earlier, I think we need to base our decisions on this on the basis of evidence, and that's why I welcome the fact there is a consultation and that it should be a genuine consultation on the facts of the matter. And speaking of facts, the fact of the matter is I would expect every farmer in my constituency to own at least one shotgun.
And that goes really for all farmers around the country. There may be up to 300,000 farmers and agricultural workers across the United Kingdom. And for all of them, as we've heard, shotguns are not a pastime. They're a necessary tool of their trade, much like a stethoscope or a power drill or a laptop. They're responsible and sober shotgun owners because they are professionals. They know the damage that firearms can deliver because they are required to use them so that we can eat our food. And speaking of the evidence, there doesn't seem to be an evidence base to suggest that it is farmers or agricultural workers that we need to be worried about. Impositions on farmers won't make us safer, it will just make them worse farmers because they will be spending more time securing the tools that they need to do their job instead of doing their job. Fundamentally, if we want food, they need shotguns. Incidentally, it should be no surprise that Northumberland Police is the second worst police service in the country for firearm licensing processing time because their remit covers thousands of farms. I've been assured by Northumberland Police that they are working on the situation, but there is a compelling case for the standardization, as we've heard, of firearms licensing. So I welcome this element being part of the proposed changes. Now, there are a number of ways to secure an exemption, if that's what we wanted to do, in order to differentiate farmers and agricultural workers, those who need these tools of their trade to do their job. I mean, we could, for instance, include retaining Section 2, but for pest control, for instance. That could be the categorisation. Or simply keeping Section 2 for those who are clearly working as farmers and agricultural workers. Police forces are no doubt clever enough to make a common sense call on whether an individual is a farmer or not. Usually the tractor gives it away. Alternatively, other policy events have shown the need for a central register for active farmers. We do need, I think, increasingly to distinguish who are our farmers. This may be another reminder.
May I intervene?
Of course.
I wonder if you would consider the impact of what is actually a farmer. Is it somebody who's part-time, has got another job? Is he a vermin control guy? I don't think you can just take out farmers when considering this because it is a multi-rural employment.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his intervention, and I'm absolutely open to the idea that we would have a broad category of those who need firearms for their jobs. I just know for a fact that my farmers in my constituency definitely do need them, and that would be my starting place. But for my part, I'm very open to that category being wider than just farmers. This may be a reminder to the government that it is a good idea, though, to know who our food growers are in a volatile world. And I know, as we all do in this place, that the mental health of farmers has been challenging. They are isolated and face immense pressures at times. So I strongly support calls for GPs being empowered to be able to use markers, as we heard, in their routine of their job if there is a relevant change in the mental health of a gun owner. We need to provide wraparound support to step in when people need help. So to conclude, Sir Alec, North Northumberland farmers and others are safe gun owners. They should not be penalised for using the tools of their trade to grow our food. And it seems clear to me that a common sense farming exemption, or some such exemption, would save both farmers and police a lot of time, money and stress.
John Milne.
Thank you, Sir Alec, and it's a pleasure to serve on your church. I'd also like to thank the Honourable Member for South Norfolk for his balanced introduction to this debate. One of the things we get right in this country is our rigorous gun control laws. In the US, we can see the consequence of slack controls, and that's resulted in gun carnage of a horrible scale, no matter what President Trump may like to claim. It's extraordinary, the lethality of weapon that's routinely available there. But here at home, we already have strong laws, and I'm not convinced that merging Section 2 shotgun licensing into Section 1 is a necessary further step. There is certainly a risk of serious unintended consequences, as others have said, for the rural economy and community. But without a commensurate... I will indeed, thank you.
Ollie Glover.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He makes a very compelling point about the UK's successes in relation to controlling gun crime up to date. to date. Does he agree with the point made by the Honourable Member for South Shropshire that the August 2021 murders in Plymouth highlighted significant problems with implementation of the current regimes around gun checks, and that, as well as any changes to the law, should be a key consideration for the government?
John Mill.
Absolutely, yeah, I thank him for his intervention, and indeed, let's apply the laws we've already got, because I think they're very well equipped to do the job already. I've been contacted by many of my Horsham constituents, but one of them, Rob, works as a farm vet, and he's very well placed to get an oversight of what's going on. He works with livestock farmers, he visits holdings large and small, and he sees firsthand how rural businesses operate. He has never written to his MP before, but he has felt it necessary to write to me about this proposal. Rob sees how shotguns are used responsibly for pest control, for protecting animal feed stores, for managing predation, for safeguarding livestock. He understands how tightly regulated the system already is, and he's deeply concerned that a blunt merging of Section 1 and 2 risks placing new financial and bureaucratic barriers in the way of business. People who are already under immense pressure. The proposal to align 1 and 2 is presented as a public safety measure, but if it had been in place already, to what extent would it have prevented recent tragedies? That is far from clear. The serious failures identified in past cases were failures of process, enforcement and oversight, not failures caused by the legal distinction between shotgun and rifle certification. What it would do, however, is impose additional administrative burdens on already overstretched firearms licensing units. There are 43 separate licensing authorities across England and Wales. Scotland is even more. Many already struggle with delays measured not in weeks, but in many months. In parts of the country, such as the southwest, it can take years. Some forces have faced backlogs so severe that they've even stopped accepting new applications. Certainly.
Thank you very much. In my Surrey constituency, in my Surrey Heath constituency, my constituency is home to the National Shooting Centre at Bisley and is therefore also home to the National Rifle Association. And one constituent of mine has contacted me to say that it took a year to have the address on the certificate changed after they moved from Hampshire into Surrey. So I wonder if the Honourable Gentleman agrees with me that the efficiencies that we need to find, rather than adding bureaucracy onto bureaucracy, is perhaps more related to the fact that we need a centralised, digitised licensing regime that enables some of these processes to be sped up, rather than adding further bureaucracy into an already cumbersome system.
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention, and I absolutely agree that, again, this is the work we should be doing, is improving what we already have. We don't need a radical change. And I question whether taking an action that would overwhelm licensing units would actually enhance public safety. Can we seriously expect people to wait years for a licence? We run the risk of turbocharging a black market demand for guns. Shooting contributes billions to the UK and supports tens of thousands of jobs. It underpins conservation work. It supports game meat production. It sustains rural tourism and hospitality. It provides income in areas where alternative economic activity can be limited. Setting higher barriers to certification will lead to lower participation. The proposed change is the most significant since 1988, and could see a reduction in licence holders of up to a third, according to some estimates. For farm businesses already dealing with rising costs, this would be difficult to absorb. Bear in mind also that the legal test of whether someone is fit to possess a firearm is the same, whether it's under Section 1 or Section 2. The background checks, the character assessments, the medical requirements, these are already rigorous, and recent reforms have aligned referee requirements. If the objective is public safety, as it should be, then we should focus on improvements that would actually make the most difference. For example, introducing medical markers and consistent medical engagement. My Liberal Democrat colleague, the Honourable Member for Epsom and Ewell, has already previously set out in this chamber a more effective approach to identifying vulnerable or potentially dangerous individuals. Yes, sir.
Again, to be helpful for the conversation, Mr. Chairman, in Northern Ireland we already have those very strict medical controls, and they work. and they work because of participation of the shooting organisations and the individuals. So perhaps when the Minister comes to summing up at the end, maybe a slight glimpse at Northern Ireland and what they do might be a way forward.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and I think a trip to Northern Ireland is on hand here. I'm sure you have an excellent host. Yes.
Thank the honourable member for giving way. Earlier I made an intervention and mentioned hooded crows and killing hooded crows. I think one way we could boost the industry that the honourable member talks about is this: why are we not eating more game? I'm not for one instant advocating eating a hooded crow, although I know that they eat cormorants in Iceland, or so I'm told. I don't fancy one myself. But it's just terribly good food, and once children get a taste for it, they love it. So I don't know why we don't have pheasants being offered on school menus. And you know, it would save the Exchequer a lot of money just to eat the game we shoot.
I thank the honourable member for his suggestion. I'm not a big game meat fan myself, so I'm certainly ready for that one. Moving to a centralised, fully digitised licensing body akin to the DVLA or the DBS, with real-time verification at the point of sale, would directly address weaknesses. It would improve consistency. It would reduce fraud. It would allow police forces to focus on law enforcement rather than administrative licensing functions. So if we're serious about safety, that's where our attention should go. The wrong kind of reform could damage viable farm businesses and undermine food production for no clear benefit. So I urge the government to listen carefully to rural communities, to licensing professionals, and to the evidence. Let's modernise licensing. Let's strengthen the medical safeguards. And the result will be improved public safety while supporting this valuable industry and community. Thank you.
Thank
you, Sir. It's a pleasure to serve here today under your chairship, and I thank the honourable member for South Norfolk for his excellent introduction to the debate. I've come here today because I want to listen to these arguments and these debates that we're having to help inform my thinking about gun licensing. Now, this debate is about one very narrow aspect of shotgun licensing. And whilst my instinct is always towards stricter gun control, my starting point has to be that any change to the law must make people safer in a meaningful way, and it shouldn't simply add complexity or bureaucracy unless there's a clear and proportionate safety benefit. I'm very proud that Britain has very strong gun control. Public safety has long underpinned our approach to gun control, and I think that is seen in the relatively very low levels of firearms offences that we have. And of course, shotguns have legitimate uses, both for sport and for animal control, and the process for obtaining a shotgun licence is simpler than that of other firearms. Police have to satisfy themselves that the applicant can be trusted with a firearm, that they've got good reason to own one, and that they will not endanger public safety. And at the moment, shotgun licences are generally granted unless there is a good reason to refuse, whereas rifles, which are of course more powerful, require a higher level of proof, require applicants to demonstrate a good reason for use of each firearm. And then the consultation that the government put forward asked whether those tests should be joined together under a single framework to make shotgun applications the same as current rifle rules. So the current framework has worked well, we think, for the vast majority of licence holders, but we have seen tragedies with legally held firearms. Plymouth in 2021, Woodmancote in 2020, and so the government launched a consultation to look at whether these distinctions still made sense. And I came to this debate because I'm genuinely undecided. I really don't know what the best way forward. So it's been really interesting to hear the debate today, particularly the details of coroner's reports, the details of what has actually underpinned the tragedies that we have seen with legally held firearms. You know, I grew up in a very small Cumbrian village, about 300 people. I may have shot a few tin cans in my time. And so I understand how the vast majority of gun owners are very responsible. I understand how important shooting is to rural life. And I've had a number of my rural constituents reach out to me to share how these potential changes would affect their community. And I'm glad that the government is committed to listening to the role shooting plays in the rural economy, in rural culture, And the messages from constituents have really reminded me just how strict the safeguards that are already in place are. Background checks, medical markers, police interviews and renewals every 5 years aren't trivial hurdles. And of course there are substantial differences between the ways that shotguns and rifles are used. Shotguns are generally less concealable, more associated with game and pest control, and they're less commonly used in organised criminality than other firearms. But at the same time, we do have to look at the logic of the system. There are practical difficulties to having different legal tests for different weapons, and it can feel inconsistent to the public, particularly those who are not used to being around guns, who are not used to the legal use of firearms. And, you know, it can be difficult for the police to apply different tests. And of course, those who've been bereaved by gun violence, those who've been harmed by guns, those who work in domestic abuse settings or who've experienced domestic abuse themselves where firearms have been a part, will quite rightly ask us what are we going to do to help prevent future tragedies. And given how deadly they are, of course we need tight controls on weapons. I think everyone here agrees that. And there have already been some really important steps in this area to try and prevent harm. A greater focus on screening for any signs of potential future violence, where reasonable police interviewing partners or household members to spot signs of domestic abuse or other red flags. And I just want to touch for a moment, Sir Alec, on suicide prevention. We know from studies of suicide prevention that restricting the means of suicide can save lives. That's why we have controls on the sales of paracetamol. That's why we have blister packs for medication. Interrupting that suicidal impulse before harm can be caused is really very important. Now, shotgun deaths are a very small proportion of total deaths by suicide, but people who do attempt suicide by shotgun normally die. And so making it harder to obtain a gun could possibly prevent impulsive acts or accidents. So the question before us isn't whether we want to prevent tragedies. Everybody in this room wants to prevent tragedies. The question is whether aligning these licensing regimes would reduce deaths and serious harms, and whether any benefits would justify the additional burdens placed on applicants and on police forces, and whether there be any unintended consequences. Because I know that police forces are already under pressure with the licensing of firearms. I'll happily give way.
The honourable members make an excellent speech in coming to this debate, trying to find those answers. On the police force side, West Mercia is currently taking about 12 months to renew a licence. You have a 5-year licence. Most of my constituents saying, I'm at the 3-year to 3.5-year point, I'm starting to apply. If for some reason you leave it 6 months before, you're going to have 6 months without a licence, and you might need that for the job. So there's all of the job that you do. There's already huge pressures on the police. Does she realise how big a concern that is?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. He makes a very interesting point. We do already have backlogs for firearms licensing. Some people rely on firearms for their living, and you know if there are changes to these licensing laws, they need to come with proper resourcing to make sure that they're actually enforceable, because I think, as we've heard today, what matters, it doesn't really matter what's on the page. What matters is what happens in reality, like any law that we pass. And that needs to be thought about very carefully. So we need to make sure these rules would meaningfully increase safety, not just ramp up bureaucracy, and that they're evidence-led, proportionate and targeted at genuine risk. So, Sir Alec, I'm going to continue listening. It's been absolutely fascinating here today, listening to my constituents, listening to the police, experts in lots of different areas, and I just urge the Minister that any way forward be informed by the evidence and by the practical realities on the ground.
John Cooper.
Thank you, Sir Alex. Your chairmanship. Scotland's been talked about quite a lot here today, and policing in Scotland is separate, but these changes that are being proposed here would affect Scotland. And I think it is worth having a look at some of the figures associated with Scotland. The figures from the British Association of Shooting and Conservation shows that something like 68,000 active participants in shooting in Scotland, and many of those are in my Dumfries and Galloway constituency. It's not quite a gun by every fireside, but it's not far away from it. Much of the shooting in my area It is not about toffs. It's not about people helicoptering in to shoot grouse. There will obviously be some people who use guns as tools of the trade, but very much it's locals, and it's locals who enjoy rough shooting. They will keep dogs, and they'll go out of an afternoon, and they will go in the beautiful Galloway Hills, and they may only fire off 1 or 2 cartridges at pheasants, which of course are a non-native species. But this is also a great driver of tourism in my area, an area which struggles because we tend to be go-through, because we have the port of Cairnryan, very close to my honourable friend from Northern Ireland, and we are trying to make the area go-to rather than go-through. And shooting is one of those things that can actually help us with that. And total economic activity in Scotland from shooting is put again by Basque at around £760 million. That's not an inconsiderable sum when you consider the economy of remote and rural Scotland. But it's a big number. But I like to bring it down to a smaller scale. And I think then of businesses like D&W Countryways in Newton Stewart, which is a small shop which sells various items of clothing that you need when you're out and about, because we do occasionally get rain in Dumfries and Galloway. And it also sells shotgun shells and associated items. That business would disappear potentially under this new burden because the number of shotgun owners would simply reduce dramatically. That would leave a gap on the high street, and we have no end of difficulties with our high streets at the moment. We also have places like the Penningham Estate, which is in a converted prison, unusually, and it's trying to bring in high-end shooting parties. And again, that is a great generator of the thing that we lack most of all in Dumfries and Galloway, jobs. Depopulation is what kills areas like mine, remote and rural Scotland. When it suffers depopulation, it tends to be absolutely disastrous. And those jobs help insulate and protect us against that. With difference to my honourable friend from South Shropshire, I do shoot, but I have not been shot. I would like to keep it that way if at all possible. I did, as a schoolboy, save the life of someone who managed to shoot themselves. And to make it clear that the round that he shot himself with was stolen. And this is the issue here, is it's very difficult to legislate to prevent criminals doing things. They tend to ride roughshod over the law, obviously. And again, we've heard from honourable members that shotgun owners, firearms owners, tend to be among the most punctilious, careful, law-abiding people. They tend to avoid any involvement with the police, and in fact very often the only contact they will have with the police is when the police come to check up on their firearm certificates. So I think we are possibly looking at, to coin a phrase, the wrong target here. And I do wonder what problem we are trying to solve. There are obviously issues with horrendous incidents, and they're very, very difficult to prevent, and we must obviously think about the people who are victims of these things. But we do have some of the tightest regulations in the world already. I know how tight it is. When I was renewing a shotgun licence and the police came to interview me, and when asked where I kept the shotgun, I jokingly said under my wife's side of the bed because no one ever goes there. The officer said, "Shall I note that down?" I said, "No, let's not go there." But this is a really serious matter, and the tone of the debate is tremendous. But let's not pretend here for 1 second that this is a tidying up exercise. The change here that is being proposed is really quite profound, and the move to merge Sections 1 and Section 2 would have a really deleterious effect on shooting and thereby on, as I say, the rural economy. And I think the key message that I'm picking up here, and I hope the Minister might touch on this, is that really what we're hearing here is that better enforcement trumps more law for the sake of more law. There's no point in us passing laws here that are, never mind the quality, feel the width. And I think the danger is that we pass the law that we pass most often in this House, unfortunately, the law of unintended consequences. And I think there are better ways to address what we're trying to, the nut that we're trying to crack, as it were. Thank you.
Rupert Lowe. Thank you, Sir Alec, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I should say at the beginning that I am a shooter and a fisherman, as the Honourable Member for the Western Isles referred to, and I'm also an active farmer, so I do all those things. I am entirely opposed to this latest urban metropolitan attack on rural Britain. Merging licences would create yet more delays, more cost, more bureaucracy. Responsible gun owners are not the enemy. Let us be absolutely clear who we're talking about. We're talking about farmers, gamekeepers, sportsmen and women, and rural families. People who follow the law to the letter. People who store their firearms safely. People who undergo background checks, police scrutiny, and ongoing oversight. These are not criminals. They are among the most law-abiding people in Britain. Keeping Section 1 and 2 licensing separate recognises an important distinction in both law and practice. These systems have existed for decades, and they work. They provide proper oversight while allowing legitimate, responsible ownership. Merging them would not target criminals, because criminals, by definition, do not apply for licences. They do not fill out forms. They do not submit to background checks. They do not follow the law. They do what they want. They do not care about what we say in this place. I will give way.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way, and I appreciate the point he's making. But does he accept that there are instances where firearms have been lawfully obtained by people without a previous criminal record, and yet where they commit harm, particularly to themselves or someone very close to them?
Thank you, Chairman. Of course, some incidents have happened, but then incidents have happened with baseball bats, and instances have happened with other instruments which have not been banned and will not be banned. So you make a valid point, but I think it's one which needs to be looked at very carefully, because I think there are less instances than you might think. Merging licences would create more bureaucracy, as I've said, more delay, more cost, and more pressure on police licensing units that are already struggling to process applications on time while they prioritise prosecuting people for social media posts. Trust me, I understand this more than most. I had my gun seized in a late-night armed police raid following the Reform Party's false allegations about me. It took me months to get them back, months. A process based on subjectivity, which is dangerous. Despite Reform's best efforts, I remain both a shotgun and a firearm licence holder and a gun owner. Further delays would have real consequences for rural livelihoods and for a long and respected British tradition that contributes to conservation, employment, and the rural economy. Public safety is not improved by targeting those who already comply fully with the law. It is improved by focusing on illegal weapons, organised crime, and those who present genuine risk. Responsible firearm owners are not the problem. They are citizens who follow the rules, respect the law, and deserve to be treated accordingly. We should not burden them with unnecessary bureaucracy that achieves nothing except to make their lives harder. I urge the government to rethink these plans and start finally treating responsible gun owners with some respect. Further gratuitous conflict between the urban and countryside communities is an undesirable development when there is no justification to puerile legislation which is based on ideology, not common sense. Criminality with legally registered shotguns and firearms is not the issue. A malign civil service agenda is. Thank you.
Thank you very much for agreeing to chair this debate, and also congratulations to the honourable member for South Norfolk, my neighbour, for bringing forward the debate and opening it in such a measured way, which has been noted by all of us, I think. So I need to start with my declarations of interest. I own a firearm certificate as well as a shotgun licence. I believe I'm still a member of the Countryside Alliance. I haven't checked recently, but they're very good at taking the direct debit. And I also represent a rural community. Now, that's not a declaration, it's just that's what I'm here. That's my interest for being here. And in my constituency, overwhelmingly, there's a mixture of bafflement and anger. They're baffled because they can't see what the problem is that the government is trying to fix with this potential legislative change. And they're angry. They're very angry because it feels like, and I recognise it may not be the intention of the government, and I recognise we're talking about a consultation, so it's early stages, but it feels like another ignorant attack on rural communities with no proper interest as to the adverse consequences caused. Now, we've had many excellent speeches today, and I'm going to do my best not to repeat the points which have already been made. But I do want to start by acknowledging that this is a deeply emotive issue, because every death caused by a gun, or any other weapon for that matter, is in itself a tragedy. But we are legislators. It is our duty to put aside emotion and focus on the facts and take a rational approach, even if that can sometimes lead us to slightly uncomfortable and emotive responses. So let's try and do that. It is the first principle of government, when considering curbing individual liberties, that the government must have cause that the benefit sought significantly outweighs the damage caused as a result of that removal of liberty. So what is the issue here that the government is trying to solve? Well, the quick answer is public safety. But how much crime has been committed by the holders, the legal holders of shotguns? Now, of all crime, it's a vanishingly small percentage. In fact, it's 0.6 of 100,000th of 1% of crime is undertaken by legal holders of shotguns. Let's look at homicides. Homicides by legally owned shotguns, so the average over the last decade, I'm told, is 3.8 per annum. So you've got a significantly higher chance of winning the lottery than you have of being the victim of homicide by a legally held shotgun. It's about 1 in 15 million chance. Put that into context, 50 people tragically lose their lives every year because of faulty cooking appliances. 40 lose their lives because of accidents with ladders. And here we're talking about an average of 3.8 people tragically losing their lives as a result of legally held shotguns. So that's the size of the prize, reducing an average, a long-term average of 3.8 deaths per year, reducing that down. But to what? It won't be to zero, because any system will contain a remaining risk. We would all, sensibly, we'd recognise that no system would be 100% successful other than a system that removed all shotguns from the public. And we know that even if you were successful, even if the government was successful in removing all shotguns, other forms of lethal weapon are readily available. Let's look at knives. Over 200 deaths already per annum as a result of knives. Knives are always going to be available for as long as we like to cook food and eat it. So even if the government were successful in reducing the number of deaths, fatalities by legally held shotguns, it does not necessarily follow that there will be a reduction in the number of killings. So we're talking at best of a partial reduction in the number of killings from a maximum of 3.8 downwards. And yet the cost, the potential cost of the proposals that the government is considering are enormous. We've already heard from honourable and right honourable members that there will be a huge impact on the need for increased police resources. At the moment, people like myself who apply for a firearms licence, it's about 3,700 of those are renewed each year. That is a significant administrative burden on our police forces. But there are 150,000 shotgun licenses which are renewed annually on average. Each one of those, even if you just look at the economic cost of the application fee, that amounts to an additional cost of £7 million, let alone the cost of the police resources. We know that many people will think the candle's not worth it and will give up shooting because it's simply too onerous. Other members have already talked about the potential loss of about 20,000 jobs of full-time equivalent and a loss to the economy of getting on for £1 billion, and I will give way.
He's giving us a fascinating perspective on the statistics. But if you were the government and you were interested in reducing the harm overall from firearms, do you think there would be greater benefit from taking all that police effort, which I think we acknowledge would go into enforcement of this wider regime, and focusing it on those firearms that are more likely to be used in crime? So smuggled handguns, converted antiques or replicas, blank firing guns that are brought in illegally. If we enforced against those, would we have a bigger impact on the number than this measure would have on the admittedly tiny number that he's talked to?
I'm grateful for the intervention. The honourable gentleman is of course right. I don't have the data. I'm trying to stick with data in this argument that I'm constructing. But the principle is a very sound one. If you focus your resources in the area where the risk is greatest, you're likely to have a better beneficial impact. The Countryside Alliance estimates that these measures will have a huge impact on the economic value of shooting to the economy. There'll be a loss of about £875 million. And for what gain? Now, this is the difficult bit, because I'm going to consider the value of a life. Of course, every life, in one sense, is priceless. But in policy terms, we do already attribute an economic value to a life. In my other job as Shadow Rail Minister, I've asked the Office of Rail and Road to give me the economic cost of a saved life on the railways. And they came back to me and they said the answer is £4 million. It's worth spending £4 million on a piece of infrastructure if over the course of its life, of its use, it saves a life. That is the rule of thumb for rail. For road transport, it's actually much less than that. Now, I'm not suggesting that every death has the same value economically, because I think as a society we'd be prepared to pay a lot more to prevent a violent murder than even a tragedy on the railway. But it's that level of magnitude is where, in policy terms, we as legislators have decided in the economic value of a life. And yet here, the government appears to be proposing a change in the law which will have an impact of several £100 million, getting on for £1 billion, in order to reduce the number of deaths from a maximum of a long-term average, 3.8, to some number less than that, but well above 0. So on any rational basis, there simply is no argument that holds water that would suggest that the price of 20,000 other people's jobs and an economic hit, particularly to the rural economy, of getting on for £1 billion in order to save a percentage of 3.8 lives over the course of a year is a credible policy position. Now, I recognise what I've said is deeply uncomfortable, because we are talking about real people, people who suffer from tragedies, and I join everyone else in my deepest sympathy for people who have been affected by this in their family or wider friends. But as a legislator, it is my duty to look beyond that, and that's why I've set out this data in order to help the minister approach this in the right way. Now, I said my constituents are baffled, but they're also angry, because this feels like a tin-eared approach to the rural way of life. It feels like It fails to understand the community connections that bring rural communities together. It feels like a government that would propose this has no idea of who we are and how we live our lives. It feels like that the government doesn't understand, doesn't care, or perhaps it does, which would be even worse, and it disapproves of our way of life. It feels like an attack on the rural way of life without justification, an attack on the rural economy without justification. The Conservative government, has been mentioned previously, didn't consult on this proposed change of the law for a very good reason. It's because it's a terrible idea.
I'd like to thank and reiterate the thanks to the Honourable Member who opened this debate in such an effective and measured way. Some 292 of my constituents have signed this petition, and I should like to place on record my thanks to all those who have contacted me in recent weeks to relay and explain some of their concerns about the proposed merger of the Section 1 and Section 2 firearm licences. And I'm very conscious that a great number of honourable members have already outlined the reasons that have been conveyed to me by constituents, and so I'll try not to repeat them, other than to perhaps try to summarise their concerns, is that the proposed changes, although perhaps well-intentioned, are disproportionate and will not actually realise the stated objective that the government has for them. And if I may begin perhaps by just touching on the concerns about the proportionality of these changes, Ms Barker. Many of my constituents pointed out that as far as the Section 1 and Section 2 applications and the current regime is concerned, many of the safety checks that exist are similar across both types, whether it is Section 1 or Section 2, when it comes to medical involvement, when it comes to background checks. And there are very good reasons for this, and every single one of those constituents who've written or have visited me in surgeries recently have said that they support those controls, that they support tight gun controls, and indeed, as many others have said already this afternoon, are quite proud of the fact that this country has a very good record when it comes to the regulation of firearms. But when it comes to these proposed changes, they do have some questions of the government, and I should like to relay those questions to the Minister, in that as far as they can see it, the changes in the proposed merger would not actually bring about much by way of greater safety for the public, not least because the suitability test, the core tenet of the application for whether Section 1 or Section 2 is already quite robust and is the same. The other thing that they would like me to convey is that even if we were to agree with the premise that the proposed merger would enhance public safety, whether or not it'll actually realise that objective will ultimately depend on the efficacy and the resourcing of the system. And on that point, they've been very clear to me, and as other members have already detailed this afternoon, the current system is already creaking. There are great pressures. Across England and Wales, you have 43 different police licensing units, each operating with slightly different standards. The inconsistency has been described to me as a postcode lottery, and it's surely something that we can all agree upon, that there needs to be a move to a more standardised, nationally consistent approach when it comes to the the processing of applications for firearms licences. But perhaps most importantly, the capacity of the existing system to deal with these proposed changes, if they were to be implemented. I think I'm right in saying, Ms Barker, that there are over 500,000, 500,000 Section 2 certificates at present. Now, I know there are concerns that that number will reduce should these proposals come about, but say for the sake of argument that we only have 250,000 Section 2, or what would have been Section 2 certificates after these changes. That would still more than double the Section 1 licences at present. And we know, as others have mentioned, there are severe delays and units under pressure across the country where the inconsistencies in processing times are quite significant, whether it's 12 weeks in some circumstances to over 3 years at the worst. So can we really be confident that even if we were to agree with the premise that this merger is a good idea and it will enhance public safety, are we confident that it could even be realised or implemented given the current system and the operational difficulties that they are shouldering. Now, I would argue, like many of the constituents that have come to meet me, that actually what we should be doing instead of this proposed merger of Section 1 and Section 2 is to look at the system itself. Others have already mentioned the need for greater resourcing, and I would very much agree and support such a move. But perhaps more boldly, this idea that was presented by the Honourable Member for South Shropshire, and I think others also have mentioned it, about a centralised national licensing body. It strikes me as eminently sensible that we should have a centralised system body, much like the DVLA when it comes to the licensing of motorists, and used to actually look at this so that they can specialise, that they can look to realise efficiencies of scale and expertise, so that you have a more effective system overall. Because the other concern that I would have, if we were to proceed with these changes, is that an already overwhelmed system will find itself even more overwhelmed, and the risks are quite clearly that those firearms applications that we previously and our predecessors correctly deemed at more risk because of greater lethality of the weapons will inevitably prioritised, and so those what were Section 2 applications will fall to the bottom of the pile. And what that means for many of my constituents will be that farmers, those involved in pest control, will find that they are facing even longer delays to secure the relevant licenses so that they can operate and perform that key crucial function for the rural economy. Or the reverse. Yes.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving me. His point about the DVLA is an interesting one. If I consider my case workload over the years, I wouldn't necessarily hold the DVLA out as being a model of the advantages of centralisation. But are we not losing sight of the fact that Parliament, when it legislated in the first instance for 2 different classifications, did so for a reason? And that reason, in essence, has not changed. So at the risk of pursuing something that is essentially procedural, do we not actually, at the end of the day, come away with worse outcomes, which surely is what matters to all those who care about the safety issue here?
Well, can I thank the Right Honourable Member for his intervention, and I must concede that perhaps, Ms Barker, the DVLA wasn't the best of examples to cite with this idea, but he is correct to state that the original Act back in 1920, I believe, did differentiate between the smooth barrel and the rifle for very good reasons, and others have touched upon. My honourable friend from Angus and Perthshire Glens, I think, elaborated on this point about the differentiation in terms of the lethality and effective range. And I think those are very important points that remain salient and key, surely, if the objective of this exercise is to ensure public safety. And my concern, leading on from that point, if we were to merge, is that either we have a system which is already overwhelmed and which will find those less risky weapons applications for those licenses fall to the bottom of the pile, to the impact on legal and lawful uses such as those in my constituency, whether it is for conservation, farming or indeed sport. Or, quite perversely, you might have a situation where the riskiest, most dangerous weapons also find themselves lost in an overwhelmed system, which surely is not what we want, and I think is perhaps just one potential unintended consequence that we should be mindful about as legislators. And so, for that reason, and for those reasons, Ms Barker, I should just like to impress upon the government to urge caution, that we need to be mindful that there are many unintended consequences, and that actually, rather than looking to embark on this very significant change, might we not perhaps be better in the first instance at looking at ways of making the current regime work better? And if I could commend to the Minister this idea of a centralised body, not like the DVLA, that could then perhaps free up police resources to actually tackle the illegal firearms and ownership, because I think that would represent a far better way forward and achieve what I think we all want, and that is to improve public safety.
Yeah.
Blake Stevenson.
Thank you, Ms Barker. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And can I thank the Honourable Member for South Norfolk for introducing what has been a really balanced and thoughtful debate, which I hope the Minister has found useful and will take lots of useful comments forward as the Government moves forward with its plans. I welcome the opportunity to contribute to this important debate on firearms licensing and the reforms we need to strengthen public safety whilst maintaining the trust of responsible shooting communities. I'd like to begin with a case that's been referenced by honourable members previously in this debate, the tragic Prosper case in Bedfordshire, which revealed serious vulnerabilities within our current licensing system. An individual, Nicholas Prosper, obtained a shotgun using a highly convincing forged certificate, a document that appeared legitimate to a lawful vendor, and then the following day went on to commit a triple murder within his own family. This was on my doorstep in North Luton. Police later confirmed that he'd also planned an attack on a local school, prevented only through the swift actions of Bedfordshire's officers. Just last week, I met again with a member of the extended Prosper family, someone whose life has been utterly shaken by this tragedy. Listening to their grief, their unanswered questions, and their determination that no other family should ever endure such devastation has shaped my contributions to this debate. I'm grateful for the courage it took for them to speak to me about something so profoundly painful, and I'm hopeful that their experience will help drive the reforms needed to prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again. For that family and for our wider community, change must be about preventing real, life-altering harm and ensuring that the system designed to keep people safe cannot be exploited again. It's important to acknowledge that this was not an isolated vulnerability. There's been at least one further attempt to use a similar forged certificate, fortunately spotted by a vigilant registered firearms dealer whose professionalism prevented a potentially catastrophic situation. But we cannot depend on vigilance and instinct alone. Public safety must rest on systems, not luck. At the centre of this issue lies the National Firearms Licensing Management System. It's an outdated platform, unable to provide real-time certificate validation and no longer fit for the demands placed upon it. The Home Office is now, I understand, tendering for its replacement, expected in mid-2027. Crucially, the new system will introduce real-time online certificate verification, in my mind akin to the MOT checking service people are familiar with. This is strongly supported by the police, licensing experts and responsible shooting organisations. The replacement platform will enable wider modernisation, new digital licensing formats, stronger anti-fraud measures and a public portal allowing certificate holders to update basic information themselves. These changes will reduce pressure on police forces, improve data accuracy and support a more efficient and secure licensing environment. But serious concerns remain in the interim. The 7-day review mechanism is helpful, but it cannot eliminate the risk exposed in Bedfordshire and indeed across the country. If a firearm is transferred before police notification, there's a dangerous window in which harm can occur. Bedfordshire Police have been clear with me in my interactions with them, and I agree with them, that the system must be capable of validating a certificate before transfer proceeds to make the secondary market much safer. Some have suggested that the solution lies in a far more radical structural change. They want to merge the Section 2 shotgun licensing regime with a stricter Section 1 system used for rifles and higher powered firearms. I understand why people reach for a radical change in the wake of tragedy. It happens after every tragedy, and we have the strictest gun laws in the world as a result. Constituents understandably want reassurance, and they want decisive action to ensure it never happens again. But the evidence simply does not support the approach being proposed by government for all the reasons explained by members and honourable members here today. Shooting organisations and licensing specialists tell me that merging Section 1 and Section 2 would not materially improve public safety. Both regimes already require rigorous background checks, suitability assessments and medical scrutiny. But tragedies have arisen from failures in the system, outdated technology and administrative gaps, not from the distinction between certificate types. A merger would generate significant unintended consequences, increased strain on already overstretched police licensing teams, slower processing times, higher costs for responsible shotgun owners, and damage to rural economies, game management and conservation work. At the same time, I must highlight the unacceptable delays to licensing that residents and shooting organisations consistently report, delays that are particularly acute in my constituency of Mid-Bedfordshire, which falls under the Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire, Hertfordshire Firearms Licensing Unit. This unit is now formally recognised as the worst performing in the country, with some applicants waiting up to 2 years for renewals or grants, placing livelihoods, rural businesses, conservation activity and community clubs under real pressure. I'll gladly give way.
Yes. Thank the Honourable Member for giving way. One of my constituents, Martin Price, who holds both a Section 1 and a Section 2 licence, got in touch with me ahead of this debate. He's really clear that ownership is a privilege and safeguards are essential to the system, but he describes similar really significant delays and inconsistency between forces where applications are in place. So does the Honourable Member agree with me that whatever the outcome of this consultation, I think the message has been pretty consistent, though I've had to dip in and out of this debate, that improving consistency and efficiency across firearms licensing departments would be a vital step in ensuring public safety?
Yeah, could I thank the Honourable Lady for that intervention, and I absolutely agree. You know, my constituents like hers want a system that works, want a system that's swift, but also a system that's safe, and I think the Honourable Lady makes some excellent points. And these delays coincide with rising licensing costs, meaning that responsible, law-abiding certificate holders are paying more while receiving a poorer service at the moment. This is not sustainable, and any reform must ensure that those who follow the law are not unfairly penalised by the overstretched system. Crucially, merging regimes would not address the real vulnerability, the absence of real-time verification. In summing up, I'd be very grateful if the Minister could please assure us that she understands the distinction and will take those views forward as she moves forward with these legislative proposals. Across Bedfordshire, more than 1,000 residents have signed the national petition calling for Section 1 and Section 2 licensing to remain separate, including nearly 300 people in Mid-Bedfordshire alone. Their message is clear. Focus reforms on the real risks, not on measures that burden those who already comply with the law. A modern verification system will improve public safety. A structural merger of shotgun and firearms licences will not. I also want to put on record my thanks to Bedfordshire Police for their professionalism and for their insight and for their commitment to preventing further loss of life and for the compassion they've shown to the Prosper family and the wider community. Their insight into the system's shortcomings must shape the reforms that follow. We must empower them, not encumber them. Can the Home Office Minister now set out the precise timetable for delivering real-time verification on what interim safeguards will be put in place before 2027 and how both technological and legislative reforms will be accelerated? Our objective must be ensure that that what happened in Bedfordshire can never happen again. We owe that to the Prosper family. We owe it to every family in the county, and we owe it to every community in this country. But we also owe it to the responsible shooting community to ensure regulation is proportionate and supportive rather than a blocker to their participation in country sports, conservation and stewardship. And before I conclude, Ms Barker, and I should have said this up front, I must declare an interest working very closely with BASC on this, and having been on a deer management course with them, which I did in order to improve my knowledge of firearms. I'm not a firearms licence holder, but I have in the past held shotgun licences, but I must declare that interest before I conclude. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Charlie Maynard.
Thank you, Ms Barker, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And I thank the member for South Norfolk for bringing such an important debate, but also introducing it so well and with such balance. I really appreciate it. I'm very proud and very relieved that we live in a country which has got some of the strictest gun laws in the world. And that has got obviously a very painful history that had got us to that point. But I think that is something that we are very fortunate for. And as my friend for Horsham mentioned, it's like, you know, there are many other places which have got much worse places than we have. I, in December, started to have a flood of emails on this come into my inbox, and for some reason, one Saturday morning about 5:30, found myself awake and wanting to dig into the internet on this, and dug into the murders that had happened, and how they had happened, and what had gone on around there. And obviously there's a mix. But I also, and I grew up with shotguns, and I'm still a shotgun owner and certificate holder, but not a firearm holder. And I hadn't really understood in detail Category 1 versus Category 2. And looking into that, I was like, holy smokes, this is going to change rural life enormously if this goes through. And that really kind of gave me the heebie-jeebies and put me down about 2 hours of internet research and an email to my spokesperson to kind of say, let's get on top of this fast if we're not already. Because I think the consequences of this proposal are enormous and very damaging. And I think various members have come to this with a great deal of knowledge. And some of the stats that have been brought out here about how many people have been killed, and every death is one too much, I get that. But looking at also how this licensing is working or is not working, and I think that highlighting of the failures of that licensing, and also the changes that have really come through in August. So in August, what happened? Last August 2025 brought in checks, so references 1 to 2, so to 2 referees required. Brought in anything connected with domestic abuse and violence, that's not going to happen anymore in terms of allowing them to be licensed. And other medical checks. I think that is new. That's only 6 months old. Yeah. So seeing how that lands and what impact, hopefully very positive impact, that brings to the situation is important before we take steps further. And as many members have said, the firearms licensing systems amongst how many 43 licensing authorities, it's a mess. And I think it is an excellent candidate to be consolidating this and running as one unified, well-resourced, digitised system that allows people to get recertified quickly and effectively. I really recommend that we head in those directions as quickly as possible, rather than in the direction of the proposal today. I'm going to just finish on one other point, which is I'm still relatively new to this House, and one of the reasons I think we are all here is we want to serve our constituents well, and we want to keep the temperature of debate low, because I think things like this, where people have died, matter. And if we are ramping it up, I don't think we are serving ourselves individually or our communities well by doing that. And I think these are very serious things. It does deserve a serious debate. But our rural communities are certainly wary and hurt. And yes, of course, things like family farm tax, SFI have really hurt them. I would really urge the government to go very carefully here, because I really want to avoid a situation where we have got narratives of this sort of elite or that sort of elite pushing things down on people, because that doesn't do us any good. And trying to, all of us, staying away from that and taking this on its merit would really serve us all well. Thank you.
Robbie Moore.
And it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I thank the Honourable Member for South Norfolk for securing this important debate on behalf of the Petitions Committee, in which 121,000 people, over that figure, have signed this petition, and what I believe has been one of the fastest signed petitions that the Petitions Committee has received for a long period of time. And I think we could all agree that it's been a well-worthy debate to have. And I've certainly engaged my constituents on this important issue across Keighley and Ilkley. Most recently, actually, at Ilkley Rugby Club, an event that had been organised by Basque that I was kind enough to speak at. And many farmers, land managers, pest controllers, those participating in game shoots and, of course, clay pigeon shoots, turned up to express their level of concern about the government's aspiration to merge Section 2 and Section 1 under the Firearms Act 1968. And I think it is widely recognised that firearms licensing is effective at protecting public safety. There is no evidence that moving Section 2 to Section 1 will improve its protection. And I do think it is right to look at the data, as my honourable friend for Broadland and Fakenham has rightly gone into. Of course, any death is absolutely horrendous. But we know that looking at the Home Office data associated with homicides from legally held firearms has averaged around 3.8 deaths per year for the last decade. To put that in context, that's around 1 in 15 million people in the UK population. 280 people on average are dying or have experienced death from knives, and 32 just in 2023 alone died from handling fireworks. The reason I want to just raise that is I think it's important to understand, despite when you look at the coroner's report from the deaths that took place in Plymouth and the level of reasoning that the coroner came out with, he did not come to a conclusion that the merging of Section 2 and Section 1 was a recommendation. And therefore I'd like to ask the Minister, why is this consultation even before the public going forward? And why is this a narrative that the government is wanting to pursue despite the data that the Home Office is holding and despite it not being a recommendation by the coroner? But I raise the point around fireworks because as a member of the Petitions Committee, within the last 12 months alone, we have had 2, I believe, petition debates in this place, widely attended by many members of Parliament. And yet it has been an ongoing request of the government of the day to bring out tougher regulations associated with fireworks, but yet nothing is forthcoming from the government. But yet here we are in another petitions debate on a consultation that has not been requested by the wider community, not been requested by those that hold firearms, but yet here we are debating it, and yet there's a forthcoming consultation on it. We all know that despite the regular tightening of controls on firearms since the 1968 Act, there has been no correlation between the rate of deaths from firearms and the increased controls. And therefore I would advocate, as the coroner advocated in the Plymouth deaths, that there is a focus on all of the other aspirations that has been rightly indicated around tightening of the existing control mechanisms that are in place, not the merging of Section 2 and Section 1. I also note, as I indicated in my intervention earlier on in the debate, that the Law Commission in its 2015 report on firearms law did not recommend moving Section 2 to Section 1. And therefore I again ask the Minister, why is this consultation coming forward? What I think is really important to look at is the inefficiency that we're all experiencing across the country at the moment to do with how firearms licensing departments are working. There are 43 licensing authorities. The vast majority are operating inefficiently. We know that a quarter of firearms licensing departments are taking more than a year to process grant applications. Some are well over 3 years, as it is at the moment, and therefore many of those that are wanting to renew their applications or seek applications in the first place are suffering delay. Processing applications under Section 1 for rifles involves more checks, more costs, and will inevitably put more burden on those 43 authorities. And therefore, why are we therefore going forward with this recommendation despite it not being requested? And then I want to look at the impacts on the wider shooting community. Shooting alone is worth £3.3 billion to the UK economy. It generates £3.9 billion to the wider economic activity and supports 67,000 jobs. And those jobs are employed from not only those with licences themselves, but our farming community, those carrying out pest control, gun shops, shooting grounds, instructors and coaches, ammunition, firearms and accelerated manufacturers, clothing, country clothing, pubs, hotels, hospitality sectors, our farms and estates, game dealers and processors, vets, feed merchants and agricultural services, event staff are all going to be negatively impacted if the government pursues its agenda that is going forward. And therefore, I do urge the government not to proceed with the narrative that it is intending to do so. And this, in my view, is actually about politics, because we've seen under this government firearms licensing costs increase by 138%. We've seen the government already ignore scientific information that was put forward to them around how our moorland is controlled, with bringing out the banning of controlled burning of heather on moorland despite scientific evidence coming forward to them. We've seen an attack by this government on other country pursuits, and we've seen the family farm tax and other negative impacts on our wider farming community. So I actually do think that this is a pursuit amongst our rural economy negatively by this government. And I would like to simply conclude by asking the government, why are we in this scenario? As I mentioned, when we look at the data, that we've had request after request consistently on bringing out tougher regulation to do with fireworks, but we are simply not seeing that coming forward by the government, but we are in a scenario where reports, law commissions, coroners have specifically not put forward this recommendation, but yet we are debating it in the House. It's a consultation that is forthcoming, and I'd like to understand from the Minister why we are even having this conversation to do with the consultation.
Greg Smith.
Serve under your chairmanship, and I start by drawing the House's attention to my entry in the Members' Register of Interest with particular relation to the same deer management course my honourable friend from Bedfordshire attended, hosted by the British Association of Shooting and Conservation last December. And also, for transparency, say that I'm a member of the Countryside Alliance, I'm a member of BASC. Both of those memberships predated my election to this place, and I shoot myself, and I'm a shotgun certificate holder. But I haven't come to this debate, even though I am my own MP, to talk about my own passion for shooting, but on the importance that shooting has to my constituency. Some 477 constituents signed the petition we debate this afternoon. I have had many, many emails from fellow shooters in the constituency, as well as actually those considering taking up shooting, having their first go at a playground and applying for a shotgun certificate. And indeed, I can't put it better than my constituent Stuart, who put it to exemplify the importance of shooting to my constituency. You only need to spot the game feeders in the fields from any train passing through Buckinghamshire to see how important shooting sports are in this constituency. But of course, it's not just shooting sports that will be affected by the changes this petition is about. As others have said very eloquently throughout this debate, yes, it's shooting sports. Yes, it's the playgrounds. Yes, it's game shooting. Yes, it is also farmers. It is pest control and it is predator control. It is things like deer management. And if we didn't have deer management and those people that are willing to get a firearms license and often get called out by the police themselves in order to deal with a deer that has perhaps been knocked over in the road and needs humanely dispatching, or indeed to stop our countryside being overrun, we would be in very great difficulty. But as my honourable friend for Keighley and Ilkley concluded his remarks with, it's that wider economic impact, not just to those that hold a shotgun certificate or a firearms licence, but it's people like David and Nikki Florent in my constituency who run, despite its name, it's in Buckinghamshire, the Oxford Gun Company in the village of Oakley, a gun shop, a shooting ground. They don't just sell shotguns and rifles and cartridges and ammunition, but the clothing ranges, the boots, the glasses, the ear defenders, everything that goes in to shooting at large that would be at risk if the change that is being consulted on by the government and that this petition is about goes ahead. Because as others have said, the impact of this change could lead to a huge number of people saying it's just not worth it anymore. They're not going to put themselves through the process of renewing or even getting a shotgun certificate in the first place. If we look back to the last significant reform of the licensing regime back in 1988, from there was a decline of around a third of participants in shooting. And there are estimates out there that suggest this change from Section 2 to Section 1 would equal a similar reduction in the number of people wishing to put themselves through the process of getting their firearms licensing renewed. I will happily give way.
Thank the Honourable Member for giving for my indicative intervention. Not a word was said. He's talking about the benefits. At the moment, we have in the United Kingdom a stable system whereby he talks about people thinking about taking up shooting. I believe we have a system whereby people are taught correctly from the word go to point your gun at the sky, point it at the ground. When you finish shooting, clean it, put it away, lock it up. And those invaluable rules. I think it's something we should be very proud of in the United Kingdom, how well we run it. And I only have to go back to, I think, 2006 when Dick Cheney unfortunately managed to pepper somebody at a quail shoot in the United States. And I think the safety standards we have in this country are the envy of the world.
I absolutely agree with the honourable gentleman. He puts it very well. Someone said earlier in the debate that holding a shotgun or a rifle is a privilege. Yes, it is a massive privilege, but it also comes with an absolutely ginormous responsibility, which I believe everybody that does hold legally a shotgun certificate or firearms license takes that responsibility very seriously. They have often been taught from a very young age the proper safety protocols around handling a firearm, the importance of keeping it locked away, of cleaning it. Very important, actually, for your own safety when handling a firearm, for if it's not clean, that can lead to some significant problems. And I think we should acknowledge just how seriously legitimate, legal shotgun and rifle owners, properly licensed, take their responsibilities as shotgun and rifle keepers in this country. And indeed, on this safety point, we all want a safe system. Yeah. None of us that have the privilege of owning a shotgun, or indeed those that also own rifles, I don't have a firearms license. I've never applied for one. That it is so imperative that there is a safe system that underpins that, because it protects those that do as well as those who do not. Now, my honourable friend for Broadland and Fakenham went through the statistics in considerable detail, so I won't seek to repeat them here, but I do think it is worth acknowledging that whilst our hearts go out to anyone that is affected by a tragedy at the hands of someone wielding a firearm illegitimately, whether they'd somehow cheated the system and got a certificate or not. Our hearts absolutely go out to anyone that has been a victim of such a tragedy. Those fatalities involving legally held firearms are extraordinarily rare, around 1 in 15 million annually, as others have said. Now, the significance of that I don't think anyone else has said in this debate is that that falls far below the health and safety executive's intervention threshold of 1 in a million. Now, that's not to say there can't be proportionate, evidence-based reforms to the licensing system. In many respects, there probably should, to tweak it and to make it safer. But what I don't see, and I don't think anybody in this debate this afternoon has advocated for, is that merging Section 2 into Section 1 would solve any problem or make anybody in our great country safer. It would bring with it considerable cost, considerable bureaucracy. I'm lucky in Thames Valley to have one of the better performing firearms licensing departments of police forces across the country. But as others have said, there are some forces who are found considerably wanting when it comes to new grants and renewal lead times. And that on the other side of that coin is the enormous financial cost to our economy. shooting worth 3.3 billion each year in its own right, generating 9.3 billion pounds worth of wider benefits. There is evidence out there. My constituent Scott believes that it could cost £1 billion a year and 20,000 jobs. There is equally evidence from the Countryside Alliance that specifically looks at alignment between Section 2 and Section 1, reducing the total value by £2.38 billion in the first year, and a loss of between 13,600 and 17,400 full-time jobs. So I urge the Minister, this is a debate that's looking at a live consultation, to stop, reflect on what she's heard this afternoon in this debate, what the shooting community in my constituency, and I dare say everybody's constituency, is saying on this matter, as she goes through the process of reforming police forces per se. Perhaps pause any conversation on this until we know what those new police forces are actually going to finally look like, as to whether any national scheme, and I've heard arguments on the other side of the debate to a national firearms licensing scheme as well, that particularly that the system we've got now does have local officers that, whilst they can't know every certificate holder or licence holder in their constituency, are closer to the people they are licensing. But to look at the bigger picture, in a picture where we have significant change to the policing landscape, and pause, look at the evidence, and understand the potential of significant damage, both to safety and to the economic survival of this sport and wider conservation activity. And the final point I will make, Ms. Barker, is that a lot has been said about this being an urban versus rural matter. And I actually don't believe it is. My constituency is entirely rural. Yes, there are many shotgun certificate holders and firearms license holders in my constituency, playgrounds, many shoots, lots of farms. But if we look at the number of certificates issued across the country, this is just as important to many people who live in our cities. 21,000 certificates are issued by the Metropolitan Police to London residents every year. This is something that does matter to people who shoot no matter where they live. They might go to a game shoot or a playground in the countryside, but they may live in our cities, and this is far bigger than just a rural issue.
Spokesperson Sarah Dyke.
Thank you, Ms Barker. It's an honour to serve with you in the chair today. I would like to thank the Petitions Committee and the member for South Norfolk for introducing this debate in such a balanced manner. I'd also like to thank the 445 petitioners of Glastonbury and Somerton. Gun controls should only be strengthened when there is a clear necessity to protect public safety. We Liberal Democrats share concerns that any changes to firearms licensing, including the reclassification of shotguns, must be evidence-based and go hand in hand with appropriate support. Currently, the Health and Safety Executive suggests that intervention is only required when the risk has reached 1 death per 1 million of the population. In the UK today, the average homicide rate using legally held firearms stands at 1 per 15 million people of the population. Now, this is not to say that any death isn't a tragedy. What it does show is that we already have one of the most robust firearms licensing systems in the world. Yet balancing responsible gun ownership with public safety and public perception is a delicate task. The Liberal Democrats stand opposed to the government's proposal, as the current evidence indicates that there is no need to merge Section 2 with Section 1 licences. Both already require rigorous and identical health and safety checks. However, the system must be sufficiently resourced, which currently it is not. This policy poses a real risk to rural communities, both culturally and economically. So I would welcome the Minister's feedback on what evidence the government holds that indicates that individuals who own more than one gun are more likely to commit more crimes, and how will these proposed changes deliver actual improvements to public safety.
Mrs Barker, last week I held an informative roundtable discussion in Street in my constituency with over 20 stakeholders from the shooting industry. The key feedback from this group was that the merger is ideological and it's a solution in search of a problem. One attendee, Steve, the owner of Ivythorn Sporting in Street, which specialises in firearms, reiterated that his primary responsibility above being a gun dealer is to protect public safety. He's acutely aware of his responsibility and will only sell guns to those he deems fit with the correct paperwork. And like many gun dealers, Steve feels that he is just as effective at spotting fake licences as the licensing authorities themselves, because officers in those authorities are given very little training. Now, as we've heard during today's debate, shooting is a vital part of the rural economy, contributing over 3.3 billion annually and leading to 9.3 billion in wider economic activity, supporting 67,000 full-time jobs and investing £500 million into conservation efforts every year. It is highly likely that increasing barriers to obtaining a firearms licence would drive people out of shooting. It has been estimated that it could lose the economy over £1 billion and cost over 20,000 jobs in rural areas. And for farmers, making shotguns subject to more stringent Section 1 licensing controls, particularly in relation to the location and use and purchase of ammunition, would eliminate the flexibility that farmers require to undertake effective pest control. Now, Cameron, the farm manager at the Newt in Somerset, told me that he currently has multiple gun users active on his farm estate. And in future, if he's required to monitor this and keep a record, then he'll probably, very likely, revoke those permissions. This will impact pest control on his estate and those businesses that do their jobs to control the pests. And in addition, many farmers operating with increased economic pressures, diversification into game or clay pigeon shooting can sometimes be their only option for the farm business to remain viable. And Ms Barker, I also spoke to Andy, who's the founder of Avalon Guns Limited in Street. He sells thousands of shotguns and rifles every year and has built a successful business from the ground up since opening in 1983. He told me this policy would simply devastate his business and the UK gun trade because 90% of UK gun sales are shotguns, and this merger would decimate demand and force licensed gun shops across the country to close for good. Mrs Barker, while the Liberal Democrats are supportive of the government's consultation on this policy, there is much frustration across the industry as the consultation on this merger was expected before Christmas. So could the Minister provide some clarity today about when the consultation will be forthcoming and provide further details on what will be considered in their intended policy? Because the wait is fueling great uncertainty within the sector, and it's affecting future planning and the viability of many rural businesses. Mr Barker, I'd like to just turn to sports because this merger risks damaging the sporting pathway that has underpinned British shooting successes. Clay pigeon shooting is often the entry point for young people taking up shooting as a competitive sport, providing a safe and structured introduction to the sport. Now, shooters must hold a full Section 1 licence and potentially formal membership of every club that they might visit. This would make it almost nigh on impossible to qualify for professional events. This is a time when Team GB won gold in the men's trap and silver in the women's skeet at the last Olympics in Paris. We should celebrate and nurture its success and widen access to participation, not to narrow it down. Mrs Barker also spoke to some enactors. Jane from Montacute is a member of the English Civil War Society, and this merger will significantly increase the costs of control for blank-firing, muzzle-lead weapons, with black powder weapons requiring a separate certificate for use. The change will not only add to the costly administrative burden they already face, their society plays a key role in stimulating interest in our cultural past, and this policy risks losing our enactors if they're not provided the same exemption as for theatrical guns. Ms Barker, currently within the UK, responsibility for issuing and the implementation of firearm licences rests with the local police force. Firearms licensing departments. Now, as we've already heard, each of the 43 units operate on different standards for assessing and issuing licence. Now, at this point, I should declare an interest as a shotgun licence holder myself, or indeed I was until about a month ago when my brother and I decided to give it up because I don't use it enough. But I hold a licence in Somerset. My guns were kept at my brother's cabinet on the farm 2 miles down the road in Dorset. Now, it just caused an administrative headache that he and I, for the amount of use that we got from these, decided to sadly give up our licences. But it just proves how difficult it can be on some of the very simple elements. Because the proposed merger, whilst well-intentioned, risks adding significant costs, complexities and delays to an already overstretched and underfunded system. Under this proposal, those wishing to use or own a shotgun would be required to go through the same application processes as a rifle owner. Police firearms licensing departments would be required to carry out more stringent checks on potential shotgun owners, necessitating land inspections, enforcing specific restrictions on where and when a gun can be used, and a justification for possessing specific firearms. The merger will add enormous administrative pressure on police forces who are already overwhelmed by the current system. Now, over a quarter of forces take more than a year to process applications, while some take up to 3 years. As an example, in the second quarter of 2025, Avon and Somerset Police completed 99% of its applications within 4 months. However, Cambridgeshire Police were only able to process 37% of applications during the same period. Now, rural police forces, who are responsible for areas with the highest level of gun ownership, will now face a potential 4-fold increase in workload, with no corresponding uplift in resources. So will the Minister confirm what assessment has been made of the scale of the additional workload police forces will be placed under because of this proposal? Because currently Avon and Somerset Police's firearms licensing department isn't able to take telephone inquiries due to their unmanageable workload. So without additional resource, which the Home Office proposals will require, they simply won't be able to provide a viable service. And in addition, as we've heard, the current process is archaic, bureaucratic and reliant on a paper-based system. It's simply not fit for purpose, and it's certainly not fit for the future. Mrs Barker, if driving licence, although we've heard that's probably not the best example, and passports can be processed digitally, then surely it would be more efficient for gun licences to be issued in this way, especially when we consider the 138% increase in gun licence fees brought in last February. This fee hike was implemented to help tackle processing inefficiencies across all departments. But concerningly, less than half of all forces have used these additional resources to improve their own processing timeframes. This is why today the Liberal Democrats are calling for a centralised national firearms agency, which would shift to a digital processing system, standardise fees, reduce wait times, and ensure safeguards such as medical markers are implemented effectively and consistently. Ms Barker, this reform to gun licensing authorities would remove the administrative burden crippling police licensing departments and allow them to focus on their primary role, frontline community policing. Because many across the industry feel the government is trying to find a solution to a problem that the evidence suggests doesn't need addressing. Stakeholders argue the current system would work, but it needs to be enforced and resourced properly, rather than there being a gap in the current law. So, Ms Barker, firearms licensing must protect public safety while remaining fair, workable and proportionate for those who hold licences responsibly and lawfully. Thank you.
Opposition spokesperson Matt Vickers.
Thank you, Ms Barker. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for South Norfolk for so ably bringing forward this debate on behalf of the Petitions Committee and the more than 121,000 people who signed the petition. It's clear from the turnout today and the many, many valuable points made that this is an important proposal that will have huge consequences for rural communities. And there are a number of members who have been incredibly active in lobbying the government on this issue, including the member for Rutland and Melton, who, let's be honest, isn't known for being quiet, but is unable to contribute today due to her role. She's determined to make sure that the Minister knows about the impact on her constituents in the real world. Public safety must always be the first duty of any government. But when we legislate, particularly in an area as serious as firearms, we must ensure that what we do is proportionate, evidence-led, and genuinely effective. If we're to change the law, we must be able to demonstrate clearly that those changes will actually make the public safer. Many such changes have been set out today, but this is not one of them. The tragic cases we've heard about today are heartbreaking, and our thoughts remain with all those affected. Where there have been failings in the licensing system and where improvements are needed, of course, the government must act. That's why the previous changes were made following incidents involving shotguns, and why the last Conservative government committed £500,000 in 2024 to support the rollout of a national training package developed by the College of Policing and the National Police Chiefs Council in an effort to strengthen firearms licensing standards. Standards matter, as the Home Office has repeatedly made clear. The UK already operates one of the strictest and most effective firearms licensing systems in the world. Between April 24 and March 25, there were 522 homicides. Of those, 32 involved a firearm, but just 4 involved a licensed firearm. The same figure as in 23-24. Every single loss of life is a tragedy, but the data shows that licensed firearms account for a very, very small proportion of these crimes. The National Crime Agency's 2025 report confirms that firearms crimes in the UK remain among the lowest in the entire world. That's not a reason for complacency, far from it. We've seen recent reporting highlighting the growing threat of more powerful weapons being smuggled into the country. That underlines the importance of robust enforcement against illegal firearms. It does not automatically follow that additional burdens on lawful, licensed owners will address that threat. In fact, as pointed out, it perhaps illustrates better use of targeted resource. So the question before us, raised by those who signed the petition, is whether merging Section 1 and Section 2 licences would actually improve public safety, or will it simply create more cost, more delay, more bureaucracy without delivering meaningful benefit? When this policy was first announced, the government said a consultation would be published by the end of 2025. I'd be grateful if the Minister could confirm when that consultation will be published and give assurances that the voices of rural communities and shooting organisations will be properly heard. There is a significant concern about this proposal among those groups, including the British Association for Shooting and Conservation and the Countryside Alliance, who've raised these issues directly with the Minister. Section 2 licensing, while distinct from Section 1, is not lax. It involves robust checks and safeguards that are integral to protecting the public. The petition does not call for weaker rules. It calls for properly maintaining the current proven framework. Shotguns and rifles are different. Parliament's long recognised that distinction in law. The regulatory framework reflects differences in use, function and risk. If the government now wish to remove that distinction, they must explain clearly how doing so will enhance public safety in a way that is proportionate to the hundreds of thousands of law-abiding shotgun owners affected. We should also recognise that shooting is, for many, a legitimate and long-standing sport. If aligning the regimes increases cost, complexity and delay, the reality is that entry-level access will become harder. That risks pricing out younger participants and those from ordinary working families, making the sport less accessible at grassroots level. The likely outcome of such a change will be fewer shotguns in lawful use. That will not be without consequence. In rural communities, shotguns are not simply a sport or leisure item. their tools of work. Farmers and pest controllers rely on them. Wildlife management and conservation efforts are closely tied to responsible shooting activity. Surveys have shown that habitat management and conservation linked to shooting cover millions of hectares. Ground nesting species such as curlew and lapwing are often cited as examples of wildlife that benefit from such management. We must also consider the wider economic impact. Research cited by the Gun Trade Association estimates that aligning the regimes could reduce gross value added in the UK shooting sector by £875 million, with a broader impact of over £2 billion across the wider economy. Protecting the public carries costs, but those costs must be justified by clear, demonstrable gains in safety. There's also a practical question. The firearms licensing system is already under strain. Data from the National Police Chiefs Council shows that many forces struggle to meet service level agreements even after the recent fees increase. A January 2026 inspection by His Majesty's Inspectorate found significant backlogs in some collaborative licensing units, including cases outstanding for more than 2 years, adding further complexity, risk compounding those delays and placing additional burdens on our already stretched police forces. Some have suggested a compromise, that any merger should not proceed until the licensing system is demonstrably efficient and effective. Given that the government has also floated broader reforms, including possible centralisation of firearms licensing, is there not merit in ensuring the system works properly before imposing any further structural change? I fear that moving shotguns from Section 2 into Section 1 will disproportionately impact rural communities and law-abiding citizens who use their shotguns responsibly. Our firearms legislation has helped keep Britain safe. It must remain robust. It must prevent those who pose a danger from accessing weapons, but it must also be proportionate, workable and grounded in evidence. At present, I've yet to see clear and compelling evidence that this proposed alignment would deliver any level of additional public safety that justifies the costs, the disruption and the impact on rural Britain. Public safety must be strengthened by evidence, not weakened by unnecessary and disproportionate bureaucracy. If the government can't clearly demonstrate that this proposal will make the public materially safer, then it should not proceed with the delays, costs and bureaucracy they will create. Thank you.
Minister Sarah Jones.
Thank you, Ms Barker, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And can I thank and congratulate my honourable friend, Member for South Norfolk, for an excellent introduction to what I think has been an excellent debate, very measured, very thoughtful, and I want to thank members from across the House for an informative and useful debate, I think, and one which I hope does justice to the number of people who signed the petition and are looking to this place and asking us rightfully questions. I think there's been a lot of points that have been made in different ways, but are actually quite similar that we've heard today, and I just wanted to reflect on those. I think the starting point is that nobody in this House is minded to get in the way of safety, to quote a member. Nobody in this place wants to do anything that will put people in more harm or that will do anything to increase the number of people who are killed through the use of firearms. And I think that is clear, and it's been very clear from everybody who has spoken. I think another point that has been made very clearly is that when looking at potential, and these are potential changes that we are looking to consult on, we need to balance quite a lot of different aspects. Firstly, the sort of basic principle of freedoms versus responsibilities and how we think about that, but also the bureaucratic burden of changing the licensing system versus the sort of economic necessity and the economic benefit that the use of shotguns that has been talked about in many different ways across this debate brings. I think that we have heard very powerful facts that have come from Basque, from the Countryside Alliance, from other places in terms of the economic benefit. I think 9.3 billion, although one person said 3.9, I think it's 9.3, in terms of the figure of the sort of wider economic benefit, and of course tens of thousands of jobs as well. So I think that sense of what's the right balance here has been a very powerful message, which I have very much heard. And I think, finally, in terms of the principles on which we can all agree, I think everybody would say that we need to think about this in terms of the sort of responsibilities and the common sense approach to this, not ideology. We need to get this. We need to get this right, and I have heard that loud and clear. Some members have talked about a perception that they've heard from their constituents about a lack of understanding of rural communities from the government. I mean, I reject that, as you would expect me to. You could look at me as an MP from Croydon and think maybe, you know, I don't know that much about shooting, and you wouldn't be wrong on that front. I have been clay pigeon shooting, but that is the extent of my knowledge. But there are some people in my constituency who have signed the petition, and of course the benefit, the huge benefit of being in my position is that I have access to a huge array of experts, colleagues from across the House, organisations and others who can help educate and inform me, and it is my business to be educated and informed on these issues, and I have learnt some things. I will give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and I hope this 3 hours has been an informed debate that will help you shape some way forward. Just looking, without a doubt, there is going to be additional resources for police and a huge amount of costs if the two licences merge. Would you seriously look at putting that money into stopping illegal weapons on the streets and that, rather than merging these two?
Can I thank him for his intervention, and I will come to that. In short, I don't think we should look at one thing and not look at another thing at the same time. We are capable of tackling several things in several different ways, but I'll come to that a bit more later. I think talking in terms of what we can all agree on, I think those basic principles we would all agree on, and I think another principle is that we need to avoid, in whatever we may or may not do, unintended consequences, and I've heard that loud and clear as well. And I should say that I've also had multiple conversations with MPs and colleagues and organisations on this front already, and to that end I should acknowledge Christopher Graffius, who has very sadly died after a long illness. I met with him both in opposition and in government only very recently, actually, and he was still working very hard. And he, I think, not only in his role in Basque, but also supporting the APPG, I think he made a tremendous contribution. He was very forthright in his views, as I think probably all honourable members here might have experienced, but very clear, and always argued very strongly in the interests of the community that he represented. And my condolence go to his family and to his friends and to his colleagues at what is a very difficult time. There was one debate where I think I diverge in terms of the way I look at this debate, and others will disagree. Some people were saying they couldn't see the problem that we are trying to fix. And I mean, Christopher used to give statistics to me about more people drowning in a bath than dying from the from a shotgun that has a legal, that has a licence. And I sort of understand that argument up to a point, but I also think there is something very powerful about the gravity of the situation where, well, two things. One is that we hold the power as the state to allow somebody to hold a weapon. And I think that is a different thing to trying to spend money to avoid accidents. I think we should understand the burden of that, that the state grants a licence, and that, yes, in those cases where people have been killed, they are small in number, but they are uniquely horrific, I would argue, in terms of the impact both on the immediate family and community, but also on the country. I think all of us old enough to remember Dunblane, and we're headed for the 30th anniversary. It was an enormously difficult time for that community, but for the whole country. So I think there is something slightly different about the giving of a licence and about how we think about that. Which I think we need to, the way that I approach that, that is something that gives me a sense of responsibility, I think, is what I'm saying, that we need to consider. So just a few things that I wanted to say. Firstly, this is, we are looking in due course, and I give the opposition the in due course answer, which I know is not always satisfactory, but that is the answer in terms of the consultation. We are not minded to do one thing or another through this consultation. We are listening to the evidence. We are listening to the debate. There are a degree of different things you could do, from doing nothing to completely merging Section 1 and Section 2. There are things you could do in between. Many things, actually. There's a whole raft of different interventions you could look at. And some members asked that for me to confirm that we would take into account the voices in the rural community, the voices that we've heard expressed today in terms of, and the urban community, as the point was made about the number of licences granted in London. And of course we will. Of course we will. And I understand the points about unintended consequences, and I understand the points about needing to have a balanced system. And that is the point of the consultation, is to try and understand those issues. Secondly, other points were made about don't do this, do that. And I sort of understand that, but surely we can do more than one thing at a time. And lots of people pointed to something that we are already beginning to think about, which is the calls for centralised licensing. Members will know that we published the white paper on police reform recently, and we are setting up a national police service. That is an opportunity to look at, do we have a national licensing system? Now, you would have to have some element, I think, of local at all times, because the visits to the home, for example, are made locally by local police, and you would need to retain that. But I think there is an interesting conversation to be had as we go through the reform process, and the opportunity of setting up a national police service to go, well, actually, is now the time to have a centralised licensing system. So that is something that I am happy to look at, and have indeed already had conversations about. Points were made about the licensing system at the moment and how slow it can be and how different it is in the 43 forces. Again, the police reform programme is looking to reduce the number of forces, and if we had a national police service, that can help us as well with training, standardising training. There is a new system of training in place that the College of Policing have introduced. I am going to go and have some of that training next week, so I can understand what it is and how good it is. But as the member for the opposition said, there is new training in place. There is huge inconsistency and improvements that we need to make across the country in terms of the speed with which licences are granted. And there is a thematic review underway at the moment from HMIC FRS, the inspector, and they have highlighted so far in particular the problem with... Yes, I'll give
Minister for giving way, but I was just interested to understand, why is this consultation before the public? because it just goes against the grain of the Law Commission's report in 2015, the Coroner's report. There was no recommendation within that. And secondly, would you mind answering my question to do with fireworks? Because fireworks are licensed as well, but why is there no willingness by the government to explore tougher regulation with fireworks when in 2023 there were 35 deaths associated with firework usage?
Fireworks, as the Honourable Member will know, is a lead in DBT, and I have had a conversation within the last couple of weeks with a colleague about that exact point, but I think that speaks to the point I was making, that we can do lots of things at different times. Just because we're doing one thing, it's a bit whataboutery is what I would say in terms of his point, but it's a valid one in terms of, you know, taking seriously the issues with fireworks and the regime around that, and of course I'll take that away. In terms of, he asks why we're doing this, which is a fair question, and I think we feel a sense of responsibility to make sure the system works as well as it should do, as well as it could do, and I think everybody would agree with that. If we need to change, we need to change it. The point was made about the Keyham shootings and the senior coroner looking at the issue in his Prevention of Future Deaths report, and he concluded that that a shotgun is no less lethal a weapon than a firearm if misused. The Independent Office of Police Conduct, the IOPC, when they did their independent investigation, they did recommend that the two were aligned. So just to quote, that legislation and necessarily related national guidance is amended to remove any distinction between the processes and requirements in relation to shotgun and firearms certificate holders. And there are other reports that have suggested the same, the Scottish Affairs Committee, and it was pointed out that a lot of licences are granted in Scotland for obvious reasons. The Scottish Affairs Committee recommended the same. So we are looking at this. That is not to say we have made a decision. We are open-minded about what the right course should be. So training, yes. Centralising, potentially, we're looking at that. Improving the licensing system, definitely. We have recently, or the police have recently, started producing monthly data on the time it takes people to get their licence, which is a good way of ensuring that they are operating as they should. Yes.
About the speed of licensing, I can recommend no more strongly the example of Cumbria Constabulary, who have really put their house in order over the last 18 months. I would say since David Allen became the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner for Cumbria. So I would urge that actually good practice be taken from what Cumbria has done and applied to the rest of the country when it comes to the speed of licensing.
Very, very happy to praise Dave Allen, of whom I'm a big fan. And yes, she's right. There are big inconsistencies, and some forces are doing it very well. And as the Honourable member opposite pointed out, Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire, and Hertfordshire is particularly problematic in terms of the struggles that they have, and that has been highlighted by the inspector, and the thematic review will give us more data on that front as well. So, yes.
Just whilst we're on the topic of Bedfordshire, I wonder if the Minister would reflect on the lessons that have been learnt from the Prosper case. I went into that case in quite some detail in my speech, and it's of concern to my constituents, but also constituents in Luton, and I know the member for South Luton and South Bedfordshire is here. So I would be really interested in the Minister's reflections on the Prosper case, particularly what can be done to improve controls around the secondary market, the sale, the onward sale of guns.
Can I thank him for that intervention? And it might be that he would like me to meet with family members. Are happy to do that if he thinks that's appropriate and they want to. Obviously, there's the onward sale of guns, the illegal market in guns is a massive issue that we need to tackle, and indeed we are, and in terms of the numbers, we are very fortunate in this country, as many people have said, in terms of our very strict regime and the fact that we do not have a very significant sort of gun issue, and the numbers are coming down in terms of the murders that we've seen from the use of illegal guns. But of course there is always more that we can do in this space. We work with the National Crime Agency, with Border Force and with police forces to look at these issues, and again the setting up of a national police service that can have more specialism in some of these areas will help us to do that. But if you would like me to have a meeting to learn more, I'm very happy to do that. We haven't been, I should say, idle since, I need to stop in a minute, since we came into government. There are always changes that we can make, and we have made a number of significant changes since we came into government, including the statutory guidance to chief officers of police on firearms licensing, which was reissued in August 2025. And that ensures that the police carry out robust and consistent checks on the suitability of those who hold or apply for a shotgun or firearms licence. I won't go into the other things we have done, but we have made other changes, and we're always very open to ideas. I should very briefly just say, because I do think it's important, that medical markers is really important and is already working. We will keep under review whether to mandate, but we already have a huge number, 98,000 active digital markers on patient GP records, and there were over 1,100 cases in the last year. In 2024-25, there were 1,100 cases in which the GP notified the police of a medical concern. So that is a good thing, but also it's a worrying thing that you know, there are people who have whatever it might be, mental health issues, where they obviously need support, are going to the GP, and the GP has raised that marker. So it shows how important that system is, I think, but also, you know, how careful we do need to be when we're licensing. So just to conclude, I absolutely hear and understand and will continue to learn about, and I learned about geese today that I didn't know much about, and crofting. Can't say I'm an expert, but I absolutely understand the economic benefit and the necessity and the need for the use of guns in this country. I do want to make sure we have the best regime we possibly can have, and that's why we're having this consultation. Very open to hearing more views and to learning more from honourable members, and we will publish the consultation in due course. Thank you.
Wind up.
Thank you, Mrs. Barker. As I say, this has been a brilliant debate, because this is usually what our constituents are crying out for. It's measured tone, it's solutions, not just mud slinging. I mean, there's going to be a fair amount of social media clips that have been thrown in here and there, but that's just the nature of the beast. But what I find is very helpful now is the member for Broadland and Fakenham always needs to have the final word. What I think is really helpful, though, is that we've got forward now pragmatic solutions to an issue that we all care about deeply, and that's the safety of our constituents and the safety of the United Kingdom. These are not just throwaway suggestions as well. These are ones that are grounded in facts and evidence that protect both the rural economy and also the lives of our rural constituents. I look forward to working closely with the Minister in the months ahead, in due course, when the review comes forward, to make sure that we can make this policy land in the best place possible.
The question is that this House has considered E-petition 750236 relating to Section 1 and Section 2 firearms licensing. As many are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. This sitting stands adjourned.